Go.
Okay, I hereby call this meeting to order. Can I announce the quorum?
Yes.
We have a quorum. Let me take just a few minutes to report a few things, and then we have an interesting agenda tonight. One thing we have been working on, across multiple boards around the teacher retention issue, the teacher turnover issue, and we have sort of led the way in terms of explaining how large that problem was and developing some ways of identifying the data to show, whether it's improving and how it's improving. And one thing that we all agreed on, I think it was last summer, is to ask the DC Council to create legislation that would make this data transparent, the retention data, but also data that we've been looking for in terms of representation of underrepresented groups, issues around experience, and so on. And the chairman of the council has introduced that. I mean, John Paul can tell me if I've got the language right. And we are hoping to have a hearing sometime in September. So keep your ears open and we'll keep you.
So it'll likely be October rather than September based on the timing right now. But I believe the chairman and Councilmember Grasso are in discussions now about when that hearing might happen. We do have, because it's recess, there haven't been an opportunity for everyone to talk yet. So.
Okay. Anyway, it'll be a great advance for transparency and data if we can have that happen. Second, I just wanted to say, I know we've all been in conversations with our constituents about the opening of school, and there are a lot of issues around devices or other issues. We talked very briefly, John Paul and Marcus and I, about trying to have someone come talk tonight about the issue around technology. We decided we had too much on the plate already, but we will, I think, try to have someone come talk to us at the September meeting, which also has a lot on it, but I think we need to deal with that. And the last thing I wanted to note is back in the spring, we had some wonderful presentations from a number of folks who were advocates for students with disabilities. We learned a lot about the issues that were being faced by those students in the pandemic. They've been talking to OSSE, we've been talking to OSSE, and as of last week, and I think you all got it, OSSE has put together sort of a new site that allows for people, for families that have students with disabilities, a site where they can go and get some useful information. I think there's still an issue about can the city figure out a way to provide services to students who should have been getting last year, couldn't, and have since left the system. So I would say that's one issue that is still outstanding, but thanks to OSSE for doing that. And thanks to all of you for being part of raising that. Marcus is not here. There was a shooting in his neighborhood. Again, I'm afraid he will be back. We hope still at some point, so we can come back to any report he has later. And with that, let me turn it over to John Paul.
Thank you very much. So I am very lucky to be able to do some introductions to start off my report today. First of all, I want to acknowledge that this is the first meeting where we've had both of our student representatives join us for this school year. So Alex and Shayla are both on, so wave hi. For those folks, we are very excited, of course, to have them with us. And I also want to note that we also have some new fellows joining us. In the state board, the ombudsman, and the student advocates office, we all have sort of linked up our cycles in terms of having new fellows, and so I'm really excited to introduce, at least by name, all of the fellows that are joining us. On our call tonight is Rachel Duff and Jocelyn Contreras. Wave hi. They will be joining us in the state board's office. Tyra Bayman and Desmond Rudd are joining the Office of the Student Advocate. And Stephen Mogar, Dante Taylor, and Keegan Carey are joining the Ombudsman's office. And so I want to note all of the work that those folks do. As you can, just by the number of folks, that's 9 additional people that we are really lucky to have as joining the team so that we can do more work on behalf of the residents. I also wanted to note too that our former chief student advocate, Dr. Faith Gibson Hubbard, in her new role at the mayor's office, is leading a really exciting summit that's coming up in September. September 15th is the kickoff for the Maternal and Infant Health Summit, and that will be occurring from September 15th through September 18th, with breakout sessions going on, all virtually. Dr. Fauci will be joining the mayor for the kickoff session, the kickoff summit, and there'll be some other really interesting information shared, not only with public health leaders, but also for parents and families. And so we'll make sure that you have all the information to help get the word out. Last year at the convention center, there were 1,500 people that attended in person. And so we're really hoping that with the new virtual platform, the summit can reach even more families who need the information about maternal and infant health. So I wanted to specifically call that out too. And the last thing, the last sort of announcement that I had is related to another roundtable that's actually happening right now as we speak. Congresswoman Norton is holding a roundtable, and she invited students from our group, from the Student Representatives and Student Advisory Committee, to be part of that roundtable. And we're really glad that we were able to partner again with Congresswoman Norton for that purpose. And so 2 of our Student Advisory Committee meetings are representing the State Board's Student Advisory Committee there at that roundtable and bringing student voice to that. And so we're really excited that Congresswoman Norton is continuing to champion the voice of students in those policy discussions as well.
John Paul, could you make sure everybody goes on mute, please?
Yes. Everyone go on mute. I will log on as a host and try to help that too. So members, that's a really great reminder, Fraser, that when you are not speaking, please do keep yourself on mute so that we can make sure that the audio is as clear as possible for all the folks that are at home and listening via YouTube. So that's really helpful as well. So, Madam President, that's it for me on the announcement piece. Do you want me to go ahead and move directly into the appropriations piece? Yes. Okay. Oh, yes. Bye, Rachel. Bye, Jocelyn. Thank you for joining us here. So they're going to be joining us via the YouTube link, and this is one of the things too. And I also want to note that that Dan and Serena have joined us on this on the WebEx meeting in case there are questions related to their budgets. But I also wanted to specifically note the incredible work that the Student Advocate and Ombudsman's Office have been doing over the summer and in preparation for the start of this new school year. I know that our call volume has been quite active for the past 3 days, and I know that theirs have been throughout the season, throughout the month of August and previously, in making sure that families and students have access to all of the resources that they need to make the transition to this virtual environment as successful as possible. So I want to make sure to say publicly that they're just doing an amazing job, and I really appreciate everything that they're doing. So in the file that was shared with everyone earlier is the FY 2022 need for appropriations, a draft resolution, and a list of the enhancement requests. I don't really want to go through the entire document because it is very similar to what we discussed last year, but I do want to note a couple quick things. One is that the overall dollar figure is, of course, a little bit higher than what we've had in previous resolutions, and that's due to the fact that every year salaries go up, costs go up, and so we need to keep pace with that to make sure that we are still keeping the best possible staff and keeping our programming as quality as possible for all of the folks in the district. So our overall budget number is for FY22, and remember, FY22 starts October 1st, 2021. So a year and 29 days from now would be $2.5 million. That includes staff for all of our current positions, but no additional positions. As you'll recall, staff positions that are not included in our budget have to be requested as a separate enhancement. And so those are included in our enhancement requests. And we've made the same request that we did this previous year, which would be a new staff person for the state board, would be one additional person for our work on education standards, one person to help with additional outreach and engagement work. And then both the Office of the Student Advocate and the Ombudsman Office are also asking for additional staff people to help increase their ability to serve the communities. So I'm going to sort of pause there and see if anyone has any questions about the overall budget, and then we can talk a little bit about the enhancements budget. Jessica?
Yeah, thanks, John Paul. That's all really helpful. One question I have is, I know this is always advanced planning that we're doing, but do we have any sense yet of what kind of restrictions or reductions we should expect to have to include given downturn in the economy, reduced tax base in the city, et cetera, et cetera?
No. The short answer is no. We don't have any of that information yet. I was on a call earlier today with the Deputy Mayor's Office and the other agency heads for the education cluster, and it was specifically noted that this is going to be, likelihood of reduced times or reduced expenditures. And I do think that by us holding steady with what our budget was in FY20 and FY21, we are doing that, and we never had a whole lot of extra budget space in our budget anyway, and so it's I think we're doing the right thing in making sure that we still have the capacity to serve our constituents. I think especially, and again, I don't want to speak for Dan and Serena, but I do think that their budgets in particular, before we advocated very strongly before Councilmember Mendelson, those budgets were hit pretty hard. And I mean, frankly, they would not have been able to continue the great work that they're doing without that funding. And I think it's really important for us as an agency to also stand behind the work that they're doing and make sure that that is part of our overall request. Both offices do have independent budget authority. And so I don't want it to seem like that you as state board members have the ability to sort of adjust those things. But I do think it's important that we all stand together as an agency when we're having these budget conversations about defending the expenditure of these funds as incredibly necessary.
Great. Thank you, John Paul.
Sure. Other questions? Great. So I do have one additional thing. And sorry, go ahead, Zachary.
I noticed in the roll-up that you shared just a discrepancy in advertising between the three offices. It seems like the Ombudsman and Student Advocates offices are at 10,000, and we're a fraction of that at 2,000. Can you just explain the rationale behind that? One of the things I'm thinking about is just given our social studies work as well as some of the other things that are coming down the pipeline, I could potentially see the benefit of greater outreach from the board to just educate the public on some of the things that we're working on and advancing. And I know there is also current discussion around like advertisement efforts. So just if you could explain the discrepancy and if there is any wiggle room there, that would be helpful.
That's a really good question. So for a number of years, the Ombudsman's Office and the Student Advocate's Office have done a great job in promoting their call lines in areas of the city that don't necessarily have access to all of the internet-based advertisements that the state board has typically done, through our social media and those types of things. And I think that's been a large priority. It's been a priority for those offices. We have not necessarily done anything like that. Like we haven't done a bus ad or a ad on Metro, or ads in the Washington Informer or other newspapers, largely because we haven't had a long scaled program which would lend itself to that type of outreach. I do think that it would be a really interesting thing for us to do as we continue the work on the accountability system and the social studies standards, when we're specifically going to be asking for public input, to really think again about how do we do this in a way that isn't just sending out another tweet or an online survey or those types of things. So I think you raise a really good point, and I'm certainly not going to object if we want to raise the request for the advertising to a different level. Ruth, you're on mute.
So two relevant things. I think it is a great question, and I think we should talk about it. Marcus and John Paul have been having a discussion about also trying to expand our web presence, both make it easier and more public. So that's part of it too. Marcus, I think, was going to say something about it. He's obviously not here, but I'm going to suggest that we put that also on an admin committee meeting agenda so that we can just try to talk this through, because I do think there is a need for more outreach and PR. And we did at the last minute. This year we're doing something. We're thinking about the web, but we should talk about that with a set of options and sort of think through them and then come back to the board with a set of options, I think.
Yeah, I think that's true. And let me put a pause real quick in the website thing, because I do want to talk about that, but I was going to bring that up as a separate part of the conversation. So I'm just putting a pin in that. We are lucky enough that we have an admin committee meeting tomorrow. And so I'll just add this to the agenda and ask them to bring back a recommendation to the board on changing that before our September 16th meeting. Any other? Fraser?
Just using the survey that DCPS did to parents to find out about whether the children needed computers and technology and stuff like that, and they were sending the survey on the web to the parents that didn't have computers. I think that we need to, especially with the social studies standards that we're going to be working on, that needs to be advertised. I know that we're talking about a budget a year away or 2 years away, really. But do we have any funding for something that would involve something other than doing an online survey to people that don't go online or don't speak English or whatever, all of the faults that online survey covered?
We do have, so the resources that are in the budget for translations are remaining there, and they're pretty robust in terms of what we've used in the past and what we hope to be able to do in additional translations or interpretations in the future. I think it's a really solid point about the use of online surveys automatically cuts off a pretty significant population that we want to talk to. And so I think we need to do a better job of figuring out how to reach those folks without doing an online survey. Online surveys are easy and they're cheap. And that's one of the reasons we do them, right? And that's one of the reasons that a lot of people do them. But it doesn't excuse our need as a government agency to reach more people than just the easiest way. I think as the board moves into fiscal year 21, and then once we get to FY 22, I think there are lots of decisions to be made about how exactly to spend the buckets of funding that we have. The specifics in both FY 21 are the ones in FY 21 are largely defined on what we've decided previously in resolutions. The fact is in January, it's going to be a new board, and there may be some changes to what the priorities are. Certainly some things are going to remain because that's what our statutory authority is. But I think there is certainly some change possible for how we look at the issues before us. So my suggestion is that yes, that is you are right in what you're saying, Fraser, and I think that that's a really good thing for us to remember as we're moving into sort of that decision making process about what we're going to focus on and how.
The other thing too is that a lot of times surveyors already have preconceived ideas about what they want to get back from a survey, and for especially for something like the social studies standards, I know that we have an idea, but we want to get as many ideas as possible from a survey rather than going into it with a preconceived idea about what we want, and they target a certain kind of audience. Like I've never done a Nielsen survey. I've never been asked to do a Nielsen survey. I don't even know how they do it, but I know that for our particular needs, we want to reach as many people as possible when we're trying to get information. We're not trying to limit the scope of the survey.
Yep. Other questions before I talk more about the website piece that Ruth alluded to too? Karen?
Meeting is what time?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Tomorrow's meeting is at what time?
11. I'll send a reminder for you.
All right, thank you.
Any additional questions? Okay, so thanks, Ruth, for bringing that up. So Marcus and I have been talking about our website. And this is our sort of global agency website. It follows the standards that are developed for DC government websites. There is a years long in the process to update DC government websites. We are somewhat at the bottom of the list for upgrades for that for reasons, and there are reasons why it would be good to stay with that because, for instance, it is part of the funds that we pay to the Office of the Chief Technology Officer. So they maintain our website, keep it on the server, they update it for us, they do all those types of things. But I think it is also true that our website is not designed for the type of agency that we are. It isn't really designed to have all of the information that we collect, either through our public meetings or our research or anything else, our task forces, in a way that is actually accessible to anybody who doesn't already know how to find it on our website. And the second piece of that is, earlier in the chat this afternoon, I put in the link to Assembly for our meetings. That's a separate website that we pay, every year to host that information. And it would be great if we could have it all in one place, and one place for the public to come and be able to access this information. And to Fraser's point earlier, to access it in a way that is friendly to languages beyond English, and friendly to those who need a website that can speak to them, for blind accessibility or for other disabilities. And some of the work, and Jack and Karen will remember this, when I first started, that was a conversation we had back then about how the website really needed to be updated. And it's expensive, right? It is expensive to do. However, I think it is something that we should really think about as an agency putting our money to. And I think if we commit to this in FY21, so that's the next fiscal year starting in October, I think we could redesign the website, which would include the Ombudsman and Student Advocates websites as well, and make it into something that is actually useful for us in this fiscal year, so that we can be ready to have the type of accessible website that really would speak for our families within probably the first 6 months of the year. And if we do that, it will probably cost the agency somewhere, between $30,000 and $35,000. So that's a commitment of money that we would need to find in our budget to be able to spend to do that. But it's something that I want to bring to you all to talk about and discuss now on, is that something that is, we don't have to make the decision now, of course, but I want to have it in the top of your minds that is that something that we should be focusing on? If not, my suggestion is going to be to add an enhancement for about that amount in FY 2022. But that would mean that we would need to wait another year for us to have this new designed website. But my suggestion is to do it earlier than that. Karen, you're on mute, I think. Go ahead, Karen.
I agree with you. I think that being part of an agency where people, okay, I'm running for re-election, so that's no secret. And I've been to so many forums talking about the State Board of Education, and so many people are trying to get positions on the State Board of Education, and they have no idea who we are, what we do, and how we do it. And they're not only at the forums not looking very astute, but they're giving out bad information to the people who are listening to the forums. So I think that we need to raise our viewpoint. I mean, let people know who we are and what we do. I think that's very important, because they can't come to us if they can't come for us for information if they don't have any idea of who we are, how to contact us, and what we can and cannot do for them.
Thank you. Any additional thoughts, suggestions?
John Paul, I would just say that there are a couple of models of other websites within the city that I think are helpful, that are from either agencies or quasi-agencies that have done their sort of own design. I don't know if I would call DCPS super helpful, but it's better than, in terms of navigation capability, than ours and OSSI's, I think. And then PCSB also uses a board tool. I think they use board docs, but they have a similar interface between that and their website. And I find that when I go to their website, information is a little bit easier to access. And when I steer people there, they find it pretty easy to access. So just as models we might consider, those are two that are still governmental, but clearly done in a different style than that which Octo creates and monitors, that might be helpful for us to look at.
Yeah, I think it would be a great use of funds to invest in our website. I would even recommend exploring if we can link it with an advertising strategy just to reach more families, but also to make the navigation on the website more user-friendly. So I support it. I'm not steeped in how much website design costs, and so I'll take your word for it, John Paul, that that's a reasonable estimate. I don't know, but I think we could probably find the money somewhere.
I do also want to note that is very much my sort of back of the envelope estimates, and whatever we do, we would bid out this this revamp through the DC supply schedule and to certified business enterprises to make sure that we had that we did everything we could to try to select a district business, and especially a minority or woman-owned business to do this type of revamp. And so that's my guess of how much it would cost. But the first thing that we would do is put together sort of what we think it would be and then bid that out.
Gotcha. And then one quick follow-up question to be clear. To redo our website, we're then talking about doing the website design for all three of our offices, the Ombudsman, Student Advocate, as well as the State Board. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Got it.
Any other questions or thoughts on that?
John Paul, this is Ashley. The only thing I would recommend as whatever we do, we need to make sure that it's mobile friendly. The majority of our constituents are not going online on a computer to find our resources. They're getting it from their mobile phones. And so whatever we need to do, we need to think about that as being the first first face of our organization, agency.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. The mobile friendly part is very important.
I guess the only thing I would add is just I think it's a good idea. I think it's really important actually, and I would just suggest less text and more video clips if that's possible. I mean, I think that's something we should think about when we have panels and when we have, you know, maybe parts of our meetings that really underscore some of the things that we are working on, if those could become sort of in regular rotation on the website. But I think that's I'm probably getting ahead of our process here. So, but I do think that more clips are that's just more accessible to folks. So that's the main point.
So just to that point that Emily made, that was part of the initial discussion around this, was how to create a place on the website where people just went there, they'd see what we're working on, they'd see what our meetings were about, they'd see that we had just sent letters to the chancellor, or we had just whatever. So that's very much part of the thinking. Which is not to say it's easy to execute, but it is part of the thinking. Any more on need for appropriations, John Paul?
Not for me.
All right. Any other questions on this before I move to Zach? All right. Okay, Zach, on the equity statement and framework.
Thanks, Madam President. I am going to be super efficient and give us back some time. I'm going to try to share my screen and talk about two aspects. I'm going to ask that we don't necessarily debate it here, but am I sharing my screen?
Not yet. Try again.
You are now the presenter. Wait a minute. What about now?
Yep. It's starting to share.
Okay. It will kick in eventually, but my computer has been acting up lately. What I was hoping to do is to just continue the conversations we've been having about our equity statement and framework, and focusing on two parts in particular. One is the resource guide, which includes a series of questions that we would compile, that we would keep on file, frequently asked questions type of resource for future board members, or in case we ever want to reference them. Are you saying, oh, there you go. And then this, as also as part of that resource guide, are questions or protocols that Representatives O'Leary, Sutter, and Wattenberg contributed to, and I would love for them to just share their thinking. I would ask that we not debate it publicly. I think we can do that offline and tweak the language, but at least that if we can have them share their thinking and why and how they came up with the questions, I think that would be a good use of time. And then I did just want to circle back briefly to the bylaws. You've had them now for a while. I did just want to make note that I did drop the censure language based on feedback received at the last meeting. And I wanted to open that up for conversation in case there were any other concerns, since that was the last outstanding item that we had. So just to catch everyone up, in case this is the first time viewers are tuning in to our discussions around our equity statement and framework, the board is wanting to build on work that we've contributed to for years past and make our equity statement more relevant and practical to the realities that our students in DC are facing. So we've revise the language of that statement, which is in this document that has been posted online. We've also developed an equity framework with the goal of providing a common vocabulary for board members, as well as focus areas that will serve as a filter of sorts for our discussions, but also our decisions as we're considering policy and other internal decisions for the board. Those focus areas center on improving outcomes for our at-risk students, increasing the representation of teachers and administrators of color, and providing and expanding access to equity-focused or anti-racist professional development, both for educators in our schools, but as well for staff and board members on the state board. So that's where we've been. I'm happy to entertain any questions state board members have had, but given the amount of time we've talked about those things, I'm feeling pretty good there. This resource guide is, again, a resource that we're hoping to have on file for us in the future, as well as new board members to kind of catch them up to speed. The first question I would ask, and I will open it up here, is to say, we're looking at what I'm highlighting now, 3 questions that are questions we would seek to answer and have on file that future board members may ask or wonder, and what additional questions might we add? That's one question, and I'll start there. So I'll give you a second to review. And matter of fact, in case there are some that are listening just by phone, I will read these out loud. So the 3 questions that are captured here read, what is the purpose of updating the SBOE equity statement and developing an equity framework? How did the SBOE identify the 3 focus areas of the equity framework? And will these equity focuses restrict the board's work? These questions, transparently, I came up with in part because these are some of the questions that I entertained and heard from board members as well as constituents. We are not going to spend time tonight answering them. What I plan to do is to float around answers to these for us to tweak and tune leading up to our September board member to make sure everyone is okay with it. But what I would love now are there other questions we should capture in this resource that we should all work to answer and have on file? If so, if you could share those now, that would be great.
Are you talking about anybody or the ones that we have on here?
Yeah, are anyone that might want to add additional questions to this list? And then what we would do is float them around to make sure that we're all aligned on answers to these.
I was saying that because you were saying that there are people that can't see what you're talking about. So should we read the questions?
Yeah, no, I just read these 3 questions. And so we're just focusing on this first part, the frequently asked questions section. And I'm wondering if there are additional questions that folks might want to add. All right, I'm going to take the silence in the name of efficiency and moving our meeting along as people are either still thinking about it or there are no additional questions. I would say a lot of this we're going to work on offline, so we don't have to hammer it out all here. The second part of this resource guide I was hoping that we could talk about are the protocols that Representatives O'Leary, Sutter, and Wattenberg contributed to. And the point of these are simply to serve as guides or guiding questions for us to consider as we're thinking about setting our priorities annually, as we analyze policy, as we reflect on our work over the year. And we are not wedded to this, but the hope is that it will serve as a guide for us to honor our equity framework and make sure it is central to our priorities, our policy decisions, and our work over the year. So Representative O'Leary, would you mind just sharing a little bit about how and why you came up with your 3 questions for what we should consider as we set our annual priorities from year to year?
I had 4, and one of them isn't here. So So the first one is what has been done during the past year, and this is what we would be looking at the end of the year. What has been done during the past year that directly addresses systemic inequity. I'm sorry. And then the second one is what parts of the framework were not addressed. Right? So you got the first one talking about what's been done, and you got the second one talking about what hasn't been done. And I also had one that says, what changes to the framework should we make, which piggybacks on the first two. Then the fourth one was how will we work at addressing number two? And number two is what parts of the framework are not addressed. So it's all a sort of a, what would you call that if you were a doctor and trying to improve the patient kind of thing.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. So it sounds like what you're getting at, it's making sure there's coherence from year to year and using the equity framework as an analysis tool of sorts as we set our priorities for the year. Is that
Right.
fair?
Yep.
Okay. Again, for the sake of time, I'm going to have us not debate or deliberate, but at least we will have a rationale for the questions that the different representatives came up with, and we can tackle these things offline. Representative Sutter, do you mind sharing your rationale?
No worries. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this. I really appreciate that, Zachary. I took to heart the idea of us using the equity framework as a mission filter. And I gave a little header here that basically suggests that whenever we're called upon as a body to consider a policy, whether it's a policy we're being asked to review and provide input on from OSCE, a policy we're being asked to approve from OSCE, or a policy not under our purview, say something the council is bringing forward or something the mayor's office is promoting, that we are as a body considering a formal response to, a letter, etc., that we ask ourselves these three questions. And if we answer no to any of these three questions, that we reconsider whether we should support such a policy in the action we're being asked to take. It doesn't mean that we would have to not support the policy, but that it would be put through this filter of these questions. If we said yes to all of these, I think it makes it much easier for us to then decide. We can comfortably say, yes, this is a policy we would support. And it takes a lot of language right out of the framework itself. So the first is about, does it broadly relate to, center on, and or seek to advance equity for DC students? The second is about issues that disproportionately hurt and hinder the educational experience of DC students. And then the third seeks to include all of the priorities we've placed in this equity framework and ask if it applies to any or all of those. It need not apply to all, but does it encompass some piece of it? I did make one change under the representation. I said increase representation in educational spaces of groups that have been historically marginalized, so that it need not be policies only relating to teachers, but it could be about principals, it could be about panels, it could be about mayor's commissions. But the idea being that we're still focusing on that same critical piece of our framework, this notion of increasing representation for those who have been marginalized.
Thank you for that. And then last but certainly not least, Representative Wattenberg, if you could share your thoughts on the questions we should be asking as we look in the review mirror after we've completed a year's worth of work.
I can only do that if you put the questions up on the screen.
Are you all not seeing my screen?
I am, but it's not on the next page. Okay, I got it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So this is just, again, sort of pulling from the draft and the language that exists. The idea would be at the end of each year, in part as part of its annual report, that we would report on how we used our platform to generate attention and a policy focus on the issues that disproportionately hurt and hinder the educational experience of vulnerable students, including increasing the representation of groups that have been historically marginalized, taken straight from the language, support and promote the equity-focused work of the Office of the Student Advocate and Office of the Ombudsman. And I will say that last year, John Paul and Marcus, we actually worked to make sure there was, I think it was a full spread, at least a page in the annual report on those offices, which I think was great. Promote the transparency that allows the board and others to ensure that schools adhere to state policies in line with what we're doing around the teacher turnover and other data. And promote and support state level education policies aimed at improving outcomes for students designated at risk with disabilities and who are English language learners.
Thank you. Thank you. And so again, the point of these 3 protocols, if you will, is to provide the board a guide as we're conducting our work. How do we set priorities? How do we analyze policy and build out an annual review? And hopefully this will mitigate some of the debates that we've had in the past, but more importantly, ensure that we're honoring those 3 aspects of our equity framework. The last thing I wanted to discuss before I just generally open it up for questions and comments as it relates to this equity work is on our proposed bylaws changes. And so I am.
So, hey, Zachary.
Yes. Did you all hear anything I just said? I didn't realize there was someone. Oh, okay, great. Yes.
Quick question, because last time we were talking about both the historically marginalized terms and severely disadvantaged, and I know several members had concerns about both the language of using those terms, and yet they're still in the statement and in all of this framework. So can you talk about why you felt that those concerns weren't necessary to change?
Yeah, no, great question. And so as I said in my email to the board, I took the majority of recommendations from the board. I did, in fact, adopt and change severely disadvantaged to at risk. I'm now realizing that maybe that's one of the definitions I need to update. But if you look at the equity statement and the framework, I think the language is now students designated at risk per Jessica's recommendation.
Okay, so should we change because a couple of those protocols use that language.
Yes.
Just now. The other thing that concerns me, though, is there are groups that may not have been historically marginalized, but we still need to talk about them in the greater realm of diversity and equity, such as, that we've talked about in the past and we talked about last month. Age, race, and not just race, but religion, it goes on and on. It's not just about historically marginalized groups that contribute to being equitable and diverse.
So I did hear your concerns at our last meeting. Transparently speaking, that is one of the few recommendations I did not adopt. I am happy to talk offline about it, and if
it was the only recommendation I had.
Well, to be fair, you also had a recommendation about dropping the central language, and I did do that from the bylaws so as to only include the equity framework and statement language. I will just say, for the record, that I do think it is totally fair for us to talk about historically marginalized student groups and groups generally, and that is in part why we're having an equity framework in the first part, because all groups are not created equal. All groups have not had equal access to opportunity. And if we look at the data in DC for students, while there are many categories that we could use to define students, those large historically marginalized groups along race, along gender, along geographic, and I can go on, are, I would argue, those that we constantly see our outcomes divided along. And so for those reasons, I personally rejected that recommendation. I'm willing to debate offline. If board members feel strongly that we should move away from that language, I would be willing to entertain it. But that was just my rationale for that. But
I just believe that we should be more diverse, especially, I don't know what you would say to Muslim students or what you would say to, for instance, Asian students who may not be historically marginalized, but, you know, they are a diverse student group that we need to think about. Same with, you know, Catholic students or, you know, these are, or even younger students, if you want to talk about ageism, you know, these are all groups that we need to think about when we're thinking about the policies that we make.
Absolutely.
I think that the groups you're talking about, Ashley, have always been historically marginalized.
Not though.
Nope.
That's when you think about historically marginalized, it's a specific definition, and that definition is not all encompassing.
So what I would encourage us to do is to work to make.
And that's why I wanted to broaden it.
So what I would recommend we do is focus on our definition, which is included on page, what is this?
But that's not the common definition. That's what I'm concerned about, and that's why I wanted to make it broader.
Fair point.
To make sure that we really, the common, when you think of historically marginalized, you think of two groups. You think of women and you think of African Americans.
I don't.
I mean, predominantly.
I don't.
I would disagree with that. I know you don't want to debate this, but I would just put out there that that is not my definition, and I don't know. I mean, there are a lot of historically marginalized groups, and I think I agree with Fraser that all of them that you have named belong there. But also, I would agree with Zachary that, you know, when we're talking about education and unequal outcomes, that it's really important, actually, that we name sort of how African Americans have been particularly marginalized. And I think that it's really important to keep that strong and focused. Otherwise, I think it gets diluted. I don't think this was I know it wasn't intentional, this language, right? And
no, I know it's not either, but that's why I want to make sure when we're talking about D&I that we're really talking about true diversity of all student groups. And that's where I think that we need to be broader in our language. And we can't just, even though we have a large swath of one student group that might have been historically marginalized, we can't forget about the other groups that are also students in our system.
Without a doubt. And so for the sake of time, I'm going to ask that we table this conversation. Again, I would recommend that we really hone in on the definitions that we have in the document to make sure it really captures what we mean. As a board, I would just say that I think based on your phrasing, Ashley, we do have two different interpretations of historically marginalized, which is fair, which is why I think that definition document is so important. And we can have this debate offline. If the board feels strongly about anything that's included, I'm happy to bring it up for a vote at the September board meeting. But Ashley, I would say it is if I remember correctly, both you and Ruth pushed back on the censure language, and that whole section has been dropped from our bylaws. I personally think it's important, but I did want to just try to build some sense of consensus around it.
No, I appreciate that. And when we go to a bylaws review in January, I mean, obviously I'd voted for that language in the past, so I just didn't think in September it was the right place to put it. So I'm not opposed to that language. So appreciate it, Zachary. Thank you.
Thanks. So I'm not sure how we're doing on time, John Paul, but if we could take 2 or 3 more minutes, I would love if there are just general questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, if board members could just elevate them now, and then we may not be able to get to all of it in terms of answering them, but at least we know what to address offline following tonight's meeting.
I think it's important that we have censure language in the bylaws, and that how we write that up. There are plenty of models for it, but I think that it's very important that we have it, and it's not something that we should think about throwing away or anything like that. I think it's very important that we have that. Not as a hindrance for anybody or anything like that, but just to have it there so that you can't shoot somebody in the Times Square and get away with it.
Well, if you read the current bylaws, I authored that language for our AMC's bylaws in DuPont 10 or 11 years ago originally, and adapted it for the state board when we did our first bylaws rewrite my first term on the board, is making sure that if someone misappropriates funds or is convicted of a crime, that censure is available to us. So that's been there. We just need to make sure that we're rereading the bylaws and that we know what's in and what isn't. And then we can have a rational conversation about where we should go or if we should leave it as is.
I would just say, I think, building on what Jack just said, that as long as it's really clear what would be censurable, then I would support it maybe, but I don't want it to be something that's wide open for interpretation. And that's what scares me a little about it.
Fair.
I would not want this board to become a place where people couldn't have differing points of view or speak their mind. And I'm certainly disagree with what my colleagues have said, and I'm sure they have disagreed with what I've said historically. But I want to make sure that differences of opinion are separated from punitive censorship, let's say. So thank you, Emily. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Any last comments, questions, thoughts? Well, hearing none, I will just end by saying thank you all for the amount of time and effort you all put into this. I really appreciate it. I think we have a really strong statement and framework. As I've discussed our work with constituents, the public seems really excited about what we're building. And I think it's going to dovetail with our sister offices' work and how they've been anchored in equity for a while. And my hope is that it will alleviate some of the debates and conversations we've had, and we can more centrally focus on what's most important for student learning. So again, thank you for your work. I will follow up offline just to make sure we tighten up things ahead of September. John Paul, it is my understanding, again, we don't need a formal resolution. We're going to just adopt this whole stock as policy. I'm not sure what that means, but I imagine you will guide us through that process. So thank you.
Thanks, Zach. Yeah, so members, so for policy of the board, we don't need a formal resolution for that, but we do need a vote to adopt it as a policy. Bylaws changes, there is a procedure in the bylaws for that purpose as well. Madam President, with your permission, I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Sullivan for the presentation on student voice.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you.
Alex, I think you are set up as presenter if you want to start and discuss the work that you've been doing over the summer.
Sounds good to me. All right, so I'll get ready to share my presentation now. Here we go. All right. Ooh. All right, can you guys see it?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So as John Paul said, what I did over the summer at the state board is I wrote a memo focusing on how to amplify student voice and how to maximize the effectiveness of student perspective in our city, specifically in our education. So that the recommendations that I made and the recommendations that you all will see in this presentation were based on the three levels, the three main levels in which students can be active participants and really grow and foster their leadership abilities. So the first one is student engagement in school administrative decisions, and then community engagement and trying to really be active participants in the community. And the last one, of course, is student perspective in government policy making, as we all, as you all know, it's Student Advisory Committee, and that's one of the examples. So, but before you can get to those things, these three things are essential first. The first one being providing adequate mental health supports to all students, bridging the digital divide and disparities in resources and opportunities to educational opportunities, and then ensuring safe passage for students. So the first, engagement in the classroom. Some of the things before you can get to having a student that has the leadership ability and the confidence to go and really represent their peers and their community and stand up for their students at their school and in their district. We need to make sure our students are gaining that confidence to go out and be leaders, and they're gaining those leadership skills. A good way to do that in the classroom is prioritizing active student engagement by encouraging students to speak in the front of the room, write on the board, conduct demonstrations in the classroom, then also making sure that schools have the opportunities in place so that students can go out and showcase creative expression and they feel that their identity and who they are is valued at their school. We can encourage student leadership inside the classroom and school building and provide more opportunities for students to tutor and mentor students at their own school. Additional ways to encourage student voice in schools include students being directly involved in hiring processes of teachers and teacher classroom evaluations beyond basic end-of-year surveys, which I pretty much have every single year. One survey at the end of the year rating all your teachers and pretty much evaluating them on specific skills. I believe, and I've talked to many students who also agree with this, that schools should administer frequent student surveys, gauging students' levels of engagement and satisfaction in the classroom. So not just teacher evaluation, but saying, okay, how can we make school better for all students? How can, if there's a challenge that you see that you're facing, how can we try to make it better for you? And trying to be proactive throughout the school year, not just at the end of the school year. Students' opinions should be solicited and considered when teacher and administrator promotion decisions are made. Students know better than maybe anyone else which teachers are doing a good job and which teachers are leaders. I've had great teachers who unfortunately left, and I've had teachers who I didn't have such great of an experience with who went and got leadership promotions, and I wasn't satisfied with the job they did as school administrators. Students should be given the ability to form an advisory board that is directly involved in school administrative decisions. I think, and again, I spoke to numerous students who also supported something like this. Us students, we don't just want to be there for the discussions about the next dance or the next school event. We want to be there for all the discussions that are affecting our lives in the classroom and our lives in school. And then the second part, community engagement. So more funding should be allocated towards youth programs, nonprofit organizations, fellowships, internships, high school journalism, and debate programs. These are all great ways for students to be active in the community, for them to gain skills that are important for when they grow up, and just being there to sort of get that professional experience. And then also any issues that they care about, that they're passionate about, they can go and do something about it. Our really students' perspectives should be heard in the community. And some great ways to do that are encouraging student and student-led discussions on current events in the forms of forums, town halls, panel discussions, implementing tutoring programs for high school students, and forming partnerships between high schools, middle schools, elementary schools for tutoring and mentoring, and then making university resources, events, and buildings available to community members. There are programs like the one between School Without Walls and George Washington University that are in place that are similar to what I'm recommending here. Just having some of those resources available to high school students because they really are invaluable. And then partnering LEAs with professional work sites to provide professional opportunities to students year round. So a lot of students in high school or at the end of high school get internships somewhere over the summer, or in their senior year of high school, they get some sort of senior project where they work somewhere. But students really want to get some of this experience all throughout high school. And it would be a great idea for students to be able to gain that experience. And if they could do that by partnering with these professional work sites year round, then students will have a much better experience in the community, getting practice and practicing some of the skills that are important to them and getting that real world hands-on experience. And then finally, student advisories in government. Some of the recommendations here. So implementing student groups and student advisory committees in all government agencies affecting education and young people's lives. As I said earlier, here at the state board, we have one, which Shayla and I lead the student advisory committee, about 20 student members, student high schoolers who are there and who comment on some of the important issues, and we meet monthly, and we put together a report at the end of the year. And basically, we try to talk about those issues that are important and that we believe need to be solved. And there are other examples. For example, the Attorney General's office. These are all ways for students to be engaged, but also it's not just about them being in advisory committees for education. They should be in advisory committees across all sorts of government, because they all eventually do come back and affect students. So don't just look at students because they're younger and say they don't have anything to offer for something that may seem like it's not directly impacting school. It still is impacting their lives. One of the unique recommendations here that I came up with was designating student representatives at each high school and middle school for education policymakers like yourselves to hold input sessions at. So if you guys want to come to a school and gauge interest, you can talk to the head of school, a couple of students, maybe some teachers, parents who sit on the board, and maybe in a closed door discussion, maybe in an open gymnasium where you have this discussion and you allow these students to provide feedback and make it frequent. Don't just pop by once a year. Try to go there as frequently as you can. If you have a question, if you were like, how do you think this would work for you? What's your experience with this happening? Can you tell us more? Or what are some things you'd like to see? And then, like I said, just to add on for the input sessions, it would be great for the city council and state board to look at implementing them more frequently and actually getting a systematic approach to doing it, just not the occasional drop by and then put it on your social media how you went to a specific school. It's not for a photo op. Students really want to make a difference. We really want to have that impact. So we would really appreciate it if there were ways, you don't have to post on your social media. We just want to make a difference here. So if there are any ways that you can come to the school and see what people actually want, you'd be surprised to hear all the great things that students have to offer. And then also consider better ways to engage middle and elementary school students in policymaking. Just because they're younger doesn't mean they don't know what's going on in all walks of life. Of course, there are some things that they may have to be older until they may have a valid opinion on some things, but they know what's happening in their schools. And for example, our student advisory committee is just high school students. There could be elementary school students, there could be middle school students who have incredibly valuable things to say, but they're not getting that opportunity and that platform to share those things. And then finally, these are two ideas that are great ways overall just to increase youth participation in government and in the community. Lowering the voting age to become an ANC commissioner to 16. I am in school. I've been in school practically all my life. I've managed to hold this job as a student representative, and I have other extracurriculars as well. Students do a lot. They go to school, they study, but they also care, and you'd be surprised how many can find the time to have an important job like this, especially 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds when they're getting ready to go off to college and they're going to get more responsibilities. A lot of students already have a lot of responsibilities, and a lot of students know what is good for their community, especially those older students. So those would be very important things that That would be a very important implementation that could actually affect communities, because students, once they reach a certain age, and most students in general know what's going on, and they know that they can make a difference, and they know that oftentimes the people in power aren't doing the things that are actually best for their own community, and they're living in their community. They're walking from metro to go to school every day. They're coming back, they're going to those sports games, they're walking around in their own neighborhood, they see the issues that are happening. And then finally, lowering the voting age to 16. Not only can that just increase in general engagement of young people in in government, but also it can actually make students feel like their voices are heard. And also, if we can lower that voting age to 16, they also could hold public office at younger ages, which is very important because students, like I said, know what's going on and they know ways to be able to solve it. So with that, that's pretty much my presentation. I sent my report to John Paul, so you all should have it if you want to look more in depth of what I wrote, but that's it for the most part. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex, for all the work on this. Members, are there questions for Alex? Fraser and then Jessica?
That was great, Alex. First thing is, I'll start with go from bad to good. All of the things that you're talking about at the beginning. Okay, now we're in a virtual learning atmosphere, which is not going to end probably until January. How do you stay involved? How would students stay involved when they really can't be involved? Live. That's the first question. I agree with you about the end of year surveys. It was always, I never even knew how my students rated me because it was at the end of the year and nobody ever shared with it anyway. So it didn't really help me. I've always had my students evaluate me regardless of what class it was, so I can find out what I'm doing wrong. I think that they need to be at least every advisory. It just takes 5 minutes to do it. I think it's very important that you get your fellows in all the schools, both public and public charter schools, to form panels to testify in front of us so that we can hear the student voices. And that one good thing about virtual learning is at least we can hear it virtually every month. And also, why 16 and not 17? And you can answer those.
All right. Okay, for the first question, one thing that, okay, it's brought its positives, and I know a lot of students hate it right now, but the cool thing about distance learning and everything being at home is, in a way, we're more connected than ever with a lot of these opportunities. Being on Zoom, being on these WebEx here, you don't necessarily have to drive somewhere to say what's on your mind. You can just speak. Some of the great things that a lot of groups are doing now is they're finding this a great time to lead, to create in ways they haven't before, because they're realizing, in a sense, the world is more at their fingertips than they thought. All it really takes is getting some young people together and then starting a Zoom meeting. Then you have something going. Then from there, you can keep on adding, keep on building to whatever you have. I definitely agree with you for the surveys and feedbacks. That's actually one of the bad parts. I never actually got to see my teachers' reactions when they saw my feedback on the end of year surveys. But and then definitely for testifying, that's something that I'm gonna try to work on this year, especially in my school, is getting more students to come to these state board meetings, and then also the city council meetings as well. And then your last question about why 16, not 17. The reason I'll say that is because, so for example, I'm 16, and while I'm a junior, I'll be 16 because I turned 16 a couple weeks ago. So I do believe that the difference between 16 and 17 in our education system, it's kind of like there is no difference because 16 and 17-year-olds are in the same grade, like often. Same with 15 and 16. I think 17 in general is a great age, but I think more so it's this idea of like upperclassmen for high schoolers, juniors, and seniors. I think especially when you're getting to that latter part of your high school career and you're preparing, you're applying to colleges, you're getting ready to do whatever you're going to do after high school, you're becoming more prepared for the world beyond like your parents' house. So I think that's generally a good age. And I mean, I think I could, like, if I wanted to, I could try to be an ANC commissioner at 16, not 17. And it may be easier now than when I'm a senior. So that's part of the reasoning for it. But I think generally younger is better. And I think 16 is a great cutoff age because sophomores don't always have it figured out sometimes. So
I'm gonna add 2 points of suggestion to your age 16, Alex. In DC, you can both drive and obtain a work permit at 16. As someone who started working at 15, I think it would have been great to have the ability to vote at 16 on the kind of laws that govern my ability to work. So I would add to that, but I support that vote at 16 entirely. Alex, my question is actually a request that I wonder if you and Shayla might be able to do. Something I have not had an easy time getting a hold of is access to the student government contacts at high schools, as well as any student leader contacts at middle schools. So if you all through the Student Advisory Committee could help us start to crowdsource that, I've asked the principals. It's not the top of the principal's to-do list. My hunch is that you all, through your student contacts, will be able to get that. And I think it'd be hugely helpful to your state board members because I'd love to go directly to student government or student leadership groups at schools. And right now I've used proxies, right? I go to Black Swan, I go to Pathways to Power. I know the folks at Eastern, so I go to the folks at Eastern. But if we had a list and if you all would be willing to help us get that, I think that would be a great way to help us reach out to students more directly.
I definitely agree. And I know for more so for the public charter schools, since they're going to vary for the student government. Like for my example, at my school, our student government isn't really like a student government. It's more so like okay, you guys get to like handle the money and put on fundraisers. So I think that would be great. And then also if we could somehow implement a system in some of these schools where they like have an application process for a couple students who can become the student leaders, I guess, or something where we reach out to a school like you're saying and then like gauge their interest on which students want to be involved in the discussion like that. But yeah. I think
Lots of different schools have different formats. I know too. Some are involved with like the youth mayors program. Some are involved with the YMCA youth leadership stuff. So there's lots of different folks. But I think you all are going to be able to source like who should we reach out to as the state board members when we're looking to speak to student leaders in some of our schools. So thank you for that. This is great. We're so glad to have you on board.
One thing I do want to mention for in this regard is maintaining student privacy. It's been brought up before that because these students are not of age, us obtaining their email addresses and other information may not be potentially possible, and or we may need to receive parental permission to be utilizing their emails and other forms of contact information.
That's a really good point, Ashley. And we do have forms that we issue to the Student Advisory Committee each year, specifically for that purpose. And I keep that in my, file. So yes, you're absolutely right.
I think that was a great idea, Jessica. I just would echo Alex and Shayla that I too would love that information if that's something you're willing to take on. It's less a question and more a suggestion and maybe targeted more towards Ruth and Marcus. I think these are great recommendations, and I wonder what opportunities there may be to get our student reps in front of stakeholders, maybe at your upcoming meetings, whether that's the chancellor, whether that's at, members of the charter board to then disseminate some of this information to LEAs that way, the deputy mayor, others. I just want these recommendations to live beyond the pages because I do think they're really great.
Actually, my question comment was a little related to that, which is thinking about getting more people to testify, Alex. I mean, one question to you, you talked about encouraging your peers, I guess, at your school and throughout the, across the committee to testify more, which would be great. And my question is it helpful or unnecessary for us to try to create special meetings over the course of the year where we specifically ask students to come talk about specific things? I mean, is that better, or is it better if you're just looking at the agenda and you're just looking at life and encouraging people to come and testify?
I think that would be a great idea, especially right now, in the midst of like virtual learning. Like already, since my school started last week, there have already been like a number of suggestions that students have had on how to improve it. Like I think the more frequent that we get to have meetings with students, the better, because like in that way it's sort of like, well, you keep practicing until you get it right almost. And especially right now, like we don't really know how long this will continue, but we in just like 2 weeks, we've already the flaws of like some of the systems that are already in place for virtual learning have already kind of been exposed. So I think it would be helpful if there were special meetings with students. Yeah.
Well, that's something that we should consider. And we have a lot of stuff on the agenda in September, and I don't want to short it. On the other hand, this is timely to hear from students about what's going on in virtual learning. So it may be that we haven't done something quite like this, but maybe there's a way to get through our major business. And I know we have some social studies speakers, and I don't want to short them, but that then after that, we have sort of an open mic in a way that we specifically ask students to comment, tell us what's going on, because I think we'd all love to know. And that might be a way to start.
Can oh, sorry, were you going to go on?
The other idea I just wanted to throw out there is one of the ideas that we're talking about. I talked about it in the research committee, and it's going to be part of our request for information, is the idea of us being able to do rolling surveys, or some organizations do, that you sort of create some ability to constantly be able to reach out to folks and get some sense of what's going on that's sufficiently accurate that the media is interested and we're getting decent information. And it might be that is something that we could also do with students. So it's just in my mind, because that would be great.
I was just going to build on all of those ideas related to having sort of students involved in our meetings, and also you, Alex, mentioned ANC meetings, or having ANC reps as young as 16. Making me think, I mean, I've been trying to think about how to have stakeholder liaisons at each school in my ward and how to set that up. And when you were talking about, I don't remember your language, but something you were saying about, creating channels of communication between students in each school and the state board or representatives, I think, goes to what Jessica was saying a little bit about maybe that could be one of the roles that students in the student government could play, but maybe it's also, could also be a role that is set up within high schools and middle schools, right? You have always a student who fills that role and knows that they will be in contact with their, ward level SBOE member and with the chancellor and with, that they actually, every high school and middle school has that role. So that's just one thought I have that I think would be really helpful to us. And then thinking about the ANC, I wonder if that could be the case there too, where you're not necessarily running against adults, but there's a seat set aside for a student, and students are running against other students for an ANC seat, so that every ANC would have at least one student. That, that's a role that would always be filled. And then I guess I'm just curious to know your thinking on, I know some states have, students are actually voted onto the SBOE, and then they have voting rights on the state board. And I'm just wondering if you've thought about that, or if that's something you think would be a good idea. But of course, that would be, a much longer term plan. So.
Well, first to respond to the rep to each school, I think that's specifically maybe the most effective way, because while it can be great, like having the outside third parties, like some sort of, like when I participate in youth and government, having those people and trying to talk to people at the school, but I think what may be more effective is you like actually appoint specific representatives at each school, or you somehow create a system so that it's not like so there are people who are attending the school, students who know what's going on, and then like maybe they have an official title, I don't know what it is, but they're going to the school and they're seeing the issues, and then they're reporting back to the state board. Because like for me and Shayla, it's like we're representing like the entire DC high school like population on the state board, and while that's great, it's obviously not going to be as reaching as broad reaching over for like the students who Shayla and I will never meet. So I think there are ways to get more specifically like specific schools those students output. I think that would be a great way if there's some sort of system set up so that there are representatives at each school. I think for the ANC part, it may be helpful if the discussion like isn't framed to be like us having a student, but instead just having like a young person, like, because I feel like when I hear that term student, I feel like it often restricts what like the person can have influence over. Like you're saying, okay, you can talk about this, but not really anything else. I think like just in general, like a 16-year-old could probably talk about all the things happening in their community. Yeah, and then what was the last question? I lost track.
That's okay. It was about instead of having students appointed, having students voted into their position, and then having voting rights on the state board.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of I'm impartial to that. I haven't totally thought about it. I've given the thing about student reps having full voting power some thought, and I couldn't see. Yeah, I don't think it would harm. But I also think that student reps do gain a lot of power simply just out of like being able to speak. From what I've seen, but I think that could be helpful. Because it would give the students more power. I'm not so sure about the elected part because I don't know. I don't know how that's entirely possible to run a campaign and attend school. I've never tried it, but I don't know. That just seems like it may be a bit difficult, but it could work if other states do it.
Thank you, Alex.
And just
Right.
a historic, two things. Massachusetts is one of those states that does elected student representatives. So that's somewhere we can look to see what that process looks like. Secondly, on giving a student a vote, that's something that John Paul and I really delved into my first year as president 6 years ago. And it would take a change in laws. At the time, we just didn't have the bandwidth to do that. But it would take a change in law at the very least. And I just want to think about whether whether appointing student representatives and having them have a vote might lend some bias in who we appoint. And we just need to think through the ramifications of that. But I think potentially seeing students vote for the students that are going to serve on the board, and then those elected students having their independent vote might be something that's interesting and that we should take a look at.
Emily, what can you explain Maryland? Because when I went to school, Maryland's student representative was the president of the Maryland Association of Student Councils. So I don't know if things have since changed, but that it was appointed.
It might be appointed, Ashley, actually. I just remember from our NASB conference that they have voting rights. I don't know if they're elected or not, so I would have to look into that. So thank you for the checkpoint on that.
Madam President, I would love to just revisit. These are really great points and recommendations. What commitments can we make to make sure we get these recommendations in front of the folk that actually can do something to bring about the changes that students are proposing?
So I am so glad you asked that.
Oh, great.
Each week throughout the entire pandemic, Deputy Mayor Kine has held a call with all of the education cluster agency heads, and it's on Wednesdays. And so when I was on the call today, I specifically mentioned that we were going to be having this discussion and that all of the people on the call should expect to get a copy of the memo shortly after our meeting. So they already know and are expecting it.
Love that. Love that. And I would just, and maybe I'm pushing here a little, but I would just encourage that our leaders, as they are interfacing with key stakeholders, maybe carve out time to invite Alex and Shayla and others to share some of these recommendations, or maybe we just pick one to really push. But I do think there could be some legs with some of these recommendations, and it will be a disservice if we just had them put all this work into it and for it to just collect dust on a shelf.
Can I just say one more thing too, which is, I think, especially as Alex pointed out, this moment where everything is virtual does actually create some opportunities for more accessibility, and that maybe we might want to try during this period to I don't know, always have at least one, or maybe we always have 5 students representing different schools around the city, at least present at our meetings, taking notes and giving us feedback and input and suggestions of what would work best for them, or what they heard that resonated or that didn't ring true, so that maybe we're creating a feedback loop with students representing different wards, different schools. So I'm just thinking out loud here, but I do think that it would be more possible now than it might be when they have to be there in person, and that then maybe from there we could think about how to adjust it once we're all back in person. Make that be so someday soon.
Yeah, and I'll note too, I think to Emily, to your point, the student advisory committee that we have right now does do that, right? That's the point of it, and that's why Alex and Shayla, by designation of the state board, are the chairs of that group, is to make sure that they solicit information not just from the 2 schools that they attend, but from all of the high schools in the district. In previous years when we've been soliciting applications for the student advisory committee, the staff and members have also done a lot of work getting information and application information out to high schools to encourage them. And we've been very successful about getting folks onto that group. It's certainly the largest sustained group of student advisory committees that I've seen. Right now, as of today, we have 24 members on it, representing at least 12 schools, if not more. And I can try to get once we have our first meeting on September 14th, we'll have the list of folks and be able to acknowledge who they are, which I think is also one of the things that is important. And this also speaks to Ashley's point earlier. We certainly don't want to release any of that information if it's not appropriate to do so. So we need to make sure that we're checking that first.
Right. And that's a really good point. So maybe it's simpler than I was saying, and it's, really just creating more of a feedback loop with the students we already have on the advisory board or advisory committee, because I do feel like we don't have that kind of communication going, and it can be, I think members could be more proactive about that, but it is something that maybe we need to enshrine more in, our actual practices. So
I'm gonna get in here because we have to move on. I mean, I think one thing we'll do quickly is try to figure out how to get something on the September meeting, which we have control of, and then figure out a process, whether it's, a few people on the board who want to try to come up with one or two of those things to press forward with. And then we can sort of come back to this meeting with that, sort of a couple people to sit down with Alex and Shayla, or to go to the meeting and sort of figure out what's viable. I mean, I don't, without pouring cold water on anything, I do want to say it's hard to get these things done, these formal structures that have to go through the council. So if that's the way we want to go, we need to think about that with all the trade-offs that involves, or think about some very specific things to do. But it's a very worthy conversation. So maybe whoever's most interested in having that conversation with Alex and Shayla and or with the group, tell John Paul, we'll set something up and then have you guys report back at the October working meeting. How's that? Good. All right. And then also Alex will be in touch about next the public meeting in September. All right. For the next thing, we're going to have a little discussion about reopening. I want to ask John Paul to start it with a project that you all have seen an email about, but I don't think that we've ever had any presentation or discussion on it. And we don't have a lot of time, but to talk about this project that he and the other offices have developed, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I think this also could hit back to the point on student voice too. And so largely what we had developed and what Serena and Dan and I talked about back in March and April was that we really had some really great experiences from parents in the district, right? We have parents who have different levels and different types of education and experience, and they're being able to share that with their students directly, right? So, for instance, if I had children, my degrees are in European history, I could come up with some pretty interesting things on European history for kids to learn about and how to do that. But I would have no idea how to put together like a really fun science experiment or something that had to do with biology or anything, other things. And so what we thought about was, we have the ability to, because we have now lots of practice with videos and YouTube and those types of things, to accept videos from parents who talk about the things that they have been doing in distance learning to help their students, whether that's a personal story, tips on how to balance their schedules, ideas about lessons or things that have been, especially in terms of special education students, how have individual parents been handling those situations? How do you, acknowledge your mental health as a parent and as a caregiver, as well as your students' mental health? How do you support them in those types of things? When you don't have that experience on your own, it's really challenging, as I'm sure everyone can imagine. It's really challenging when you don't have those degrees and don't have all of that education available. And so what we've done is we've created a portal that parents or families or others can submit small short videos or written statements with these ideas, and we'll put them out there publicly so that it's a resource for all of our parents in the district to really have somewhere to go. If they're stuck, if they need an idea on how to engage their students, or if they're stuck with whatever it is, we're hoping that this will be a really good resource for parents. We've put out a bunch of information, both in your emails as well as through our social media accounts. There's very detailed information about how to submit a video or a testimony or those types of things. So please help us get the word out. And I highly encourage all of the board members, including our student representatives and student advisory committee, to think about what they could do and what what things that they're good at that others may really find interesting or helpful. It can be something as easy as, with if I'm cooking with my 7-year-old godson, like how to actually make, bread or how to do something like that. It doesn't have to be a really complicated type thing, but it can be something that you can highlight that you're really good at, skilled at. And so I encourage you to think about how to do that in a way that will be helpful. And what I meant earlier too, in terms of doing the student thing, Ruth and I have talked too about how do we continue to enable folks who can't physically come to our meetings when we return to the old council chambers. How do we continue to be able to accept video transcripts or video testimony or hear from people who can't come down to the 441? And it's more complicated than it needs to be, frankly. But we do need to the points that we were making earlier, offer more and better opportunities for people to participate in the policy decision making. And this is one of the ways that we thought might work. So that's my spiel.
So, all right, so this is really open time to discuss, raise issues around reopening. Frederick, did you want to start with something around the teacher retention, teacher workforce? Because I know there were some concerns about that.
We don't really know anything about what's happening with teachers right now. The teachers who, I think that it's going to really have a wave of teachers who are going to be ready to leave in the next month or two. Right now, everybody that I've talked to in the ward, the principals, they're full. They've only lost a couple of teachers. Most of the teachers are coming back. I think a lot of the teachers are coming back to see what this virtual learning is going to be, if it's going to be any better than it was in the spring when it wasn't real better for a lot of people, pardon my English. But we don't have anything. We're working on some things. We'll have more information about that at our public meeting about teacher retention. But we've got feelers out for a lot of things. Right now, there's not any information. We're not getting any information from schools about who left between June and right now. They're not talking.
And I imagine they're still figuring it out, because it's all feels.
Well, they should know.
Evolutionary.
They should know
As
who
of
left
yet,
and who's
yeah.
back. But that's just how I feel about it.
Other people want to sort of talk about what they're hearing. What about either what they're hearing, just to sort of trade our understandings of what's happening, so we're all more knowledgeable when we leave, or pose ideas about things that we ought to try to be on top of. Jessica?
So I just made a Google form that allowed people to share their feedback anonymously, and the Ward 6 Public School Parent Organization helped me distribute it. So we've got that out to the PTA presidents and principals. I sent it out to the charter leaders because WICSBO only deals with traditional public schools and DCPS. I put it on Twitter and on Facebook, and I've gotten a few responses there so far and a lot of emails from people. And it sort of bifurcated one of two ways. Either, oh my gosh, I want to shout out my kid's school, things are going really well. And I will shout out, I chatted them out on Twitter and didn't get nearly the love I hoped for them. Jefferson Academy Middle School has gotten a lot of accolades about just how well their first few days have gone. And I think I shared this with all of you in the spring. One thing that Principal Doman is doing that I just am super impressed and inspired by is that they're doing a lot of their school meetings and grade level meetings on Instagram Live. So they're getting a tremendous number of kids to log on to really engage with their school because it's a tool they use. And you can see it. You can physically log in and be like, wow, there's hundreds of kids here. This is pretty cool. So Jefferson Academy is getting a lot of accolades. On the other side, I've heard from a few parents of preschool students, not just in DCPS, about concerns about technology. So I know you all know about DCPS and the iPad delay. But a couple of parents with children in public charter schools have written to me with developmental concerns about preschoolers on iPads, saying things like, my kid's supposed to figure out how to unmute himself. Are you kidding me? Like, that's never going to happen. I'm going to have to be there if this is the developmental expectation. And that's, I think that's par for the course, but also worries me a little bit about how our earliest learners are going to be experiencing this time. The other thing, Grace Hu from Digital Equity NDC shared with me today, a concern about the DCPS devices having been loaded with software and loaded with all sorts of settings, but not all of them working the way they're supposed to. So some of the devices were not loaded with Microsoft Teams, but parents are not able to act as administrators and add Microsoft Teams. Some of them require two-factor authentication, which requires someone in the family to have a phone to access the two-factor authentication. So DCPS is aware of all these issues. I'm just raising them to share sort of what I've heard on that front. And I reached out to Matt Holtzgraf yesterday from DCPS, who said they've staffed up at the tech center and hope that people will continue to call the tech support hotline with problems so that they can continue to sort of catalog what common problems are and try and cut some of those off at the pass. So that's what I've gotten.
Anybody else?
Hey, good evening, everybody. I just wanted to, I think, echo that where, I think that there are a lot of families still finding it a challenge to get the device that they need to be successful. So a part of it is having the device. And I think to Dr. Sutter's point, a part of it is having the device with the capability and the technical support required to actually be in a posture to learn. So a lot of my families are running into issues around that. And I know that there were issues with the hotline on the first day, but I've heard that we've been assured by DCPS that they've got more folks there and that there's more capacity now than there was earlier this week. And then obviously, I'm thinking about, the 1 in 5 young people who didn't log on the first day, and hopefully that number is getting progressively better over the course of the week. But I can only imagine that those are some of our most disconnected students that still need to be connected. And the fact that we don't necessarily know if those students, need a device or whether, they're just living in a, inconsistent or unsafe housing situation or et cetera, the fact that we don't know obviously keeps me up at night. So my hope is that we can push towards that to make sure that the system gets as close to as possible to identifying which students are disconnected and really connecting them as quickly as possible. And then obviously, the ambiguousness when it comes to our charter partners, even though I think anecdotally I'm hearing that a lot of smaller communities are just doing a lot better with this. I'd be hopeful that we'll get more information about how all of our students are doing in the weeks to come, hopefully in the days to come. But those are the big things I was hearing. So I did want to echo both the device and technical support part.
I know one thing that's really bothersome in Ward 4 is for the students for whom English is not the first language. And that hasn't been rectified at all. What Marcus was talking about that hotline on Monday was a hot mess. It can't do anything but be better today than it was on Monday because they were hanging up on people. It was incredibly frustrating. And see, we're looking at each other. They're just hanging up on anonymous people. And when we talked to Paul Kine the last time and about all hands on deck, they're talking all hands. All these people that should be knocking on doors and finding out who the people. The other thing is food. The feeding sites in the city have been moved around. We had Roosevelt as a feeding site. It's no longer a feeding site. Nobody even knew it on Monday until they came up to Roosevelt and there was a sign saying you got to go down the street to the feeding site. And for a lot of our parents in Ward 4, those feeding sites were what were keeping them alive over the summertime. Now, I'm doing that, still doing the books, and I encourage all of you to piggyback on that. I know you all have jobs and I don't, but we gave over 10,000 books in the last 5 months to the students of Ward 4. So there's an incredible need for, especially with this virtual learning. And whenever we get out of this, the last thing is what are they doing about the buildings right now to make them available once we get out of this pandemic or halfway out of it to the phase 3, to make them safe? Because we have a lot of buildings in Ward 4 that ventilation systems are horrible. Some of them aren't air conditioned, and nothing's being done about the buildings. I think they just took a pass on it.
One piece of information I can offer on that, Fraser, is it's my understanding that DCPS is having 2 different people go out to every school, and it's already started. One is to look at the HVAC, and each HVAC system is supposed to be completely checked out and completely inspected by an appropriate person. And secondly, there's a whole drill around putting up plexiglass. I mean, there's sort of a whole list of things that in theory are going on, and the DGS people are going out. I know this only because I do with Mary Chase sort of we go and we visit every school normally physically, but this time we did it virtually, and that was sort of in process.
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it.
I'm with
I
you.
believe anything that anybody says.
Well, I agree with that. So it is worth people sort of keeping an eye on that, I would say, just sort of hearing that it's happening.
Important for us at all our ANC meetings virtually and any of the community meetings that we go to please encourage the participants at those meetings to raise their voices about that, because the schools, if they had opened the schools on the 31st, oh my goodness, that would have been the worst thing that could have ever happened. And the 8th of November is only 2 months away.
Speaking about the 8th of November, I think from what I'm hearing from both parents and teachers, that while everybody went in with a positive attitude, and obviously it's only the first few days, people are, both parents, teachers, students are all drained already. And a lot of it is from staring in front of a computer screen all day. And whatever we're doing, this is obviously, virtual learning is not sustainable. And so anything we can do to get back to an in-person learning is going to be much needed and much necessary for all parties.
Just building on that note from Ashley, I put a link in the chat. I'm actually house sitting in Baltimore, and so I've been watching the Baltimore news, and the Baltimore City Public Schools are rolling out a thing called Student Learning Centers at the end of September. School here doesn't start till after Labor Day, but this is essentially learning hubs for students who qualify. They've got a real specific set of descriptions about qualifications, but it's something that's I've been trying to ask about and push on and ask as many questions as possible. To Ashley's point, virtual learning is hard for everybody, and we know it's a lot harder for some kids. Marcus, to your point, folks who don't have stable living situations, folks who are homeless, folks who, even with LTE-enabled laptops, are not accessing reliable internet because of the historically racist infrastructure of our city. We've got to think about those kids, and so I'm keeping my eyes open for anybody who's got a workable plan. And Fraser, to your point, like, our school facilities certainly have their challenges, but our friends up in Baltimore have worse situations than we do. And I'll be keeping an eye on how they make it work and trying to send this to anyone in power in our city who can make these choices, because I'd love to see these choices made on behalf of our kids and prioritized in the way that folks are thinking about in other cities.
Yeah. My role model is Jaime Escalante. And if y'all remember Stand and Deliver, and he was talking about Ganas, and that's what That's what we need
You're all
at the
too
state
young,
right.
Fraser, to know what you're talking about.
Si se puede. Ganas.
It's called wanting to do something. And we need to make sure that the people who have the power want to do this. And it's going to take a big ask. We need money from the federal government. We need to have all hands on deck. In order for it, I don't think virtual learning is the answer for anything. But the whole thing about outside learning, we haven't even talked about that yet. And there's a lot of buildings and a lot of space especially in the high schools in Ward 4, where there could be a lot of outside learning going on for the next couple of months. I agree with Ashley. It's not, we need to go back to, we don't need to go back to whatever normal was. It's never going to be normal again, folks. Forget it. All right. But we need to make sure that we have teachers and students in the same space looking at each other.
One of the things that I would say has been curious to hear, and I haven't gotten to the bottom of it, there seems to be a shift in the chancellor's tone, going from every student will receive a computer that needs one, even students that live in a house with other students, to devices are available first come, first serve, suggesting that some students will go without technology. And I'm not clear if that's a matter of waiting on a large order that is still yet to come in, or if that's the plan for the rest of the year. I say that because, like many of you, I'm still hearing some families are without technology at all. For instance, just today I heard there are dozens of students in the Brooklyn Manor area here in Ward 5 that are without technology. For those students that are online, I'm hearing there are some sites, for instance, and I think you may have been tagged, that the curriculum is requiring students to get on YouTube, for instance, and it's blocked. And I would say I have this tension where I want to offer up grace, because that is my word for the year. Everybody deserves grace. We're all going through a lot. But I just am really challenged that with all of the time we had since the spring, that we're running into some of these issues that just seem like they are unnecessary. With that said, there are some positive highlights. I have heard from several teachers that they are finding that engagement is up now than it was in the spring. I forget who mentioned the Instagram Live. I think that was Jessica and Jefferson. I bumped into the instructional coach at Henley and some others who were saying they were doing some innovative things like that as well, using social media to meet students where they were, really to put learning at the forefront, which I thought was really creative. And then the last thing I would say is I have heard that teachers are not receiving the support that maybe they want and need, both in terms of navigating Canvas, whether it's in DCPS, but also just having sufficient planning and prep time. And so those are some of the trends I've heard most recently. And there's a shout out to Thompson. There's one Ward 5 parent that raved that Thompson, whatever they're doing, that they're really pleased that they are communicating very thoroughly. And so I think we should just always elevate those bright spots, like Jefferson, it seems, like Thompson and others that seem to be doing a good job.
I just have one thing to add. I already spoke about this a bit earlier, but from like 1.5 weeks of distance learning, I think it's important the way we frame the conversation is like, not that, oh, because it's so difficult, we might as well just give up on trying to make it better. There are things that are going wrong that are fixable. Like, I know that DCPS is doing something where like the Wednesdays, like they don't have like synchronous classes or whatever, and my school doesn't do that. I think from what I've heard and from what I've experienced, that would be something that would work great for my school. I know, because a lot of it, like I have a lot of synchronous classes. Like if you can cut back on the amount of synchronous classes for maybe high school students, maybe APs play into that. But like I had like 6 synchronous classes yesterday, and like there's no time for me to go outside. They were like, oh, let's go outside. Your teachers are going to encourage you to spend time outside, but that's kind of impossible when you only have 5 minutes to get from one class to the next and you have additional assignments. So I feel that there are ways we can make it better. And I think there definitely are schools, like you guys said, who are doing it well, but also that it may work better for maybe high school students than it will for elementary school students, as we're all seeing. But I think there are a lot of things that could be easily fixable if we just got the time to meet with the students or just hear like what the teachers have to say, because I know a lot of the stuff we're going through is minor, but it does contribute to like workload issues and then stress. Like those have been kind of, I'd say, the two for so far for me, those have been the two main issues that I've had, is that I feel like it's kind of more work than it was last spring. And this is like the first week. And if this is the first week, that's kind of troubling, because what does that mean for the rest of the year? But I think there are like minor changes. There are tweaks that can be made. But I think overall, like you guys said, there are schools and there are systems that are working, but they still could use some improvement.
All right, thank you. Any other comments before I make a comment and move on?
I will just add to what I've heard so far and say that, I mean, some things that I've heard have been very positive, actually, in reaching out to ask about whether schools have gotten the technology they need. To my surprise, most of them say yes. The complaint that I've heard, or what still needs to be done at some schools, for instance, one principal said that they were able to hand out all of their devices during the spring, but that I guess for some families that meant they didn't have everything they needed loaded on there. And so that's something that now needs to happen. But it was more that kind of like, there's some things that need to be followed up on, but it seems like, and I haven't been able to contact all of them, or they haven't all responded, but those that I have said that they have what they need. I've heard from several teachers in Ward 1 elementary schools that they feel very supported by their principals. And, to Zachary's point, I think, and we'll talk about this a little bit in our, when we share about our research update. But it would be good to highlight those schools and maybe learn from them. It kind of goes to the idea that John Paul was sharing about having a portal of best practices and good ideas. So I think, if we're hearing consistently from teachers that things are going, and families that things are going really well at specific schools, that maybe we want to follow up and find out what they're doing. And then I've heard, and I'm really curious to hear about this, Alex, from the student perspective as it unfolds, but I've heard about required cornerstone that's called apparently Living Through History, that will be looking at the pandemic and racial justice issues. And a couple of teachers have just talked about it in a positive light. So
that's DCPS, Emily.
What's that?
That's DCPS.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, Alex isn't in DCPS.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. Thank you. Sorry.
So I go to a DCPS school. I go to Duke Ellington, and I haven't heard about that at all, actually.
Right.
I'm not familiar with that.
It probably hasn't been introduced yet, so I'm just interested to kind of keep an ear open for that. But thank you, Shayla.
No, it's been introduced, and it was mandated to be done at the beginning of school.
Oh, so it's been done.
I don't
for 3 days.
But it was. So it's not anything new. It's a something that is supposed to open the school with the program.
Yeah, I haven't heard about it from any administrators or teachers or staff, so that's unfortunate. It's probably something that should be fixed.
We're in the 3rd day of school. So, I mean, I think, right? Am I wrong about that? Yeah. So I don't know. That's something I've heard.
If people here, pass it on to Emily so she can.
Well, no, not
tabs
just.
and
I mean,
feel it too.
It's interesting. Yeah. I mean, if it's not, if it's just so anyway. And then the one thing I'll say about English language learners that I've heard is that the Office of Language Acquisition did a good job of providing curriculum and guidance around Canvas for new ELL teachers, but that apparently schools that have, new ELL teachers were supposed to get a point person, and that not all of them have. And so that was one complaint that I heard. Yeah, and then about the learning pods, I mean, that's kind of just an ongoing thing I'm hearing from parents a lot who are doing it and are concerned about the equity piece. I have been doing some work with a sort of evolving consortium around and speaking with the deputy mayor and the director of DPR, but I'll give you an update on that when there's more to say about it. But it's something that we are sort of looking at and trying to understand what is possible with, getting system level support around that.
I want to make one comment and then move on because we started off so well under in our time limit and we're not now. But the one comment I wanted to make is what strikes me is that there is a set of people, families who really, really want to get back to school, sort of what Ashley was saying. There's also some set of teachers, I understand to be about a third, who feel comfortable doing that. And then there's a lot of families and a lot of teachers who really do not want to go back to school physically anytime soon. They're very scared. They have health issues. They have older relatives and so on. And it strikes me that there should be a conversation not about hybrid, but about multiple paths. I mean, why we could have the third of the students and families that want to be back in school physically. Let's focus on really making that a good experience, and then also focus on making a good experience virtually for those that frankly are going to want to be there for the rest of the year, because this is not going to be unscary until the year is done. And maybe another path that really does think seriously about the outdoors. I just think that's going to work better than trying to pressure people and force people to go into these situations that are really hard for them in either direction. So, all right. Next is the STAR framework, and then we'll go into committee reports. So you all have the resolution. Let me just say a little bit about it. I put it in the cover memo, but I know there were also some questions about why it's set up this way. The idea is that we want to capture in a resolution the consensus that we have. And my understanding, based on conversations and previous draft, is we have a lot of consensus on one very important reality, which is that for whatever reason, and everybody doesn't have exactly the same thinking on it, the way in which we calculate our STAR rating ends up meaning that schools with larger populations of at-risk students who are doing an equally good job in terms of growth are pretty systematically getting lower ratings. And I think we have a pretty strong consensus on that. And so one idea is, so the first thing I would like to see in this resolution is to say that, and to be clear that this is an issue and we really believe it needs to be fixed. A second thing to say is that there are many people, but not all, in other words, to share that this is not yet a consensus. There are people on the board, there are people that we represent who believe the rating has other issues, particularly that it's too narrow, that it doesn't have a broad enough view of what quality is. And to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the other concerns clearly. And to then acknowledge that here are some ways of trying to solve these problems, and we don't all yet agree on them. But here's what we understand are some options. The reason I say it this way is then we have a resolution that sort of captures our discussion so far and puts it out to the public so the public can start discussing this. Because we said from the very beginning that this is a topic we want public input on. And now is the time to do that. First of all, we have this set of things to talk about, and then we can come back later in the fall and based on further discussions with the public and further research, make some real recommendations that we want to send on to OSSE. And it's campaign season. So insofar as we have a resolution that lays out these clear concerns and puts on the table some possible options, people could start talking about it in some of these campaigns, the state board campaigns, maybe even the council campaigns. And I think that's a plus for our role of trying to generate public discussion, for trying to get input, which is something that all of us on the committee have wanted from the beginning. So that's the reason for setting it up this way, because I know there were some questions. So we establish the consensus we have, which I think has some very important things in it. Then we have a public discussion on it for a couple months. People go out to their ward meetings. Maybe candidates will talk about it. And then we come back later this fall and then make some recommendations. That would be the idea. So so I want to put that out there. Let people respond to that. I also, it was my understanding in a previous draft that we were pretty well set on this idea that we have this, I would just call it systematic downrating. And if there's sort of ways in which it should be said that make that easier, I mean, if there are ways in which I said that make that a harder consensus, I'm very interested in finding ways to fix that, because that was not the intent. My intent was very much to capture what I thought was the consensus. I know people also had some editorial comments, which I don't think we need to handle now, or style comments, but send them, we'll revise it. And I think the main thing to talk about is the bias issue and the why now issue, insofar as people want to talk about that. And the rest, what I'd like to do is, as I'm going to take the lead from Zach, is to do that offline as much as possible and really try to put together a draft that we can then bring to the September meeting. But I'm not averse to hearing other things now, but that would be my suggestion. So with that, I am open for comments.
I have one thing, and I've talked to Ruth about this, is that I think that we should, if we're trying to give guidance for candidates and for community forums before the election, which is only 2 months away, then I would think that it would be a good idea to put up maybe a one-sheeter of talking points, and not a resolution, but a one-sheeter that gives the information, that guidance. Let's say guidance. I'll be euphemistic about it. Guidance for candidates or for anybody that's in a forum, not just for elections, but just for to get it out to the community about what we are looking at as a body.
Fraser, I don't mean to interrupt, but we should not be helping candidates or talking about candidates for elections at all. We are a policy body and we got to focus on that. If we are doing this to frame an election, we are way far out of our league right now.
Okay, that's not what I mean.
Karen shouldn't have said it earlier. You shouldn't be saying it now. Nothing about that, please.
I'm just saying what the resolution is about. For an ANC, not for elections necessarily, but just for the community information. I didn't mean that, Jack. I'm not trying to guide any candidates.
What it really feels like is that we're setting this up and taking this up now then in order to influence an election. And that is not something that we should be doing. And if that's the only reason that we're voting on this now, then we need to just stop, or we need to go to the Board of Government Ethics and talk with them about it.
I didn't think we were voting on this now.
I'm sorry, let me just get in here. It's not about influencing elections, Jack. It's about having a public discussion. I just want to be clear on that, because you make a good point. It's about having a public discussion, and that's what we want to have.
Right up before the election. Got it.
Well, you know what? We wanted to have it in the spring, Jack, and we had a pandemic. So here we are. We're trying to get it out. So.
But we're not voting on this resolution tonight, right?
No, we're voting on it in September.
Okay. I'm just saying that I just think we ought to give the information out somehow.
Well, I'll just say that's part of what a resolution does, is it sort of puts out the information that we want to put out. So, okay, but I hear you. I see Emily and Jessica.
So I guess something that I think is really important is that we did hear from all of these experts, and I think it's really important for us to compile what they said so that both, the board members can see it. And that's something that we have that we can use for our further discussions. And also, we may want to make that outward facing for the public too. There's no reason not to do that, I don't think. And then in terms of a resolution, or I feel excited about, that we are doing this. I think it's, first of all, very much in our purview, obviously. And it feels very important, right? And so I do think we should do something beyond just compiling those that input that we got. I guess, Ruth, can you talk more to why a resolution versus some other public-facing document?
Yeah, because, well, a couple of things. First of all, we'll have the research report, and the second is because part of our job is to take positions on this and to establish that we have a position on part of this and that we are asking people about other parts. This is, we've worked hard to get a consensus on at least part of it, and part of it we have questions on. I think asking the staff to write a flyer about something like this is not viable. The reason you have a resolution is to put down here what we are all agreeing on. That's the point.
So you're saying
from there, I think it would be very hard to do it, frankly, as a flyer.
Right. So you're saying what the resolution is doing is saying or what we're voting on is agreement around the points that you made, which is that there are schools that are systematically downrated, as you put it, or we'll find language around that, and some of the other points. And that's the aim of having a resolution.
That, and then laying out what sort of the questions are, what the pieces are that there are concerns about, but there's also questions about, and everybody doesn't share every concern. Different people have different things, but the idea is to lay them out.
And I will just say for the record, and I'm sorry, Jessica, then you can go, that in terms of what I understood about the candidates is that it kind of goes to what I was saying about being excited about this. I think that this is something that we should be doing, and that this is a time when lots of people are talking about what we're doing. And so I think it's important just to have very concrete things out there for them to talk about. I don't care what side they take. I don't think we should be influencing it, obviously, but not just that, the teacher retention stuff, our recommendations around reopening, I think all of those are a plus for us. So this would just be one more.
Emily, the question, because why are we doing a resolution? We can certainly engage without doing a resolution on that front.
Yeah.
So that was actually sort of the gist of my questions here. I sent my detailed feedback. Ruth, I think you referred to it as editorial. Take it as you will, but I sent my detailed written feedback to everyone.
To be clear, I thought some of it was editorial and I thought some of it was substantive. I didn't mean to.
Well, to be fair, some of it was sent at the beginning of August once already and ignored, so I sent it again.
Well, I'm happy. I don't agree with that, but I'm happy to hear. I can respond to that. I'm responding.
You don't have to agree with it. I sent evidence of it to the entire board so that we could not dispute that I had sent it on August 12th.
Right.
And it was entirely ignored and included exactly verbatim the same language in the current version.
I'm sorry. It was not entirely ignored. There was first of all, we had a large resolution that we reviewed in June at the working meeting. We had a resolution that we reviewed at the research committee in June. There was Zach circulated a draft a few weeks ago. Between the three of that, with all that feedback, this is extraordinarily different than it was. So I took a lot of feedback from a lot
Ruth, am I going to speak or are you going to speak at me?
I'm responding to your saying that I didn't.
I didn't ask a question, though.
What?
I didn't ask a question. I made a statement.
Okay, and I was responding.
I didn't ask for a response is my point.
I know, but
I
I
was
can-
given
I
time to
can-
speak, and now I'm listening.
I'm also happy to, I decided not to do it because I just got the feedback a few hours ago, but I will be happy to send to you and to everybody. I feel like actually we did respond to a lot of this. And I do want, one of the issues that you did raise was that, which you raised last time, and it's still here, is that we didn't say that we were going to handle this year. In fact, when we adopted the resolution, we adopted the priorities resolution, we did adopt it with a timeline. So that presumably fits that bill. But moreover, since the beginning, we've talked about why we were doing it on this timeline. So but we don't agree. But I do think that it was, but that was, that's the response to that. And anyway, I'll send everybody the responses, because I do think actually most of it was meant, so.
So now am I able to speak?
Yes, please.
So my concern about us passing a resolution is this. I heard you say we would put out this to the public, this resolution, and ask them to respond. And then I heard you say we will have the research report. So here are my questions. If I am a member of the public and I read this resolution, I see at most 7 things that we learned from experts. There are 3 in lines 36 to 39, and then a few more later on in the resolution. But that is certainly far from the totality of what we heard from experts. And part of my concern about that language is that if we want to get into editorializing, those were selected for inclusion in the resolution from all the things we heard from experts. And that was a decision, and that's fine, but that I don't think that the public would be responding to the totality of what this board has learned and has called upon a lot of experts to share their time with us. I think it would be fair to put out to the public, this is what experts shared with us in its summary form. So I would like to see that before we put it out to the public. I think the board should all get to see that and review it before we put it out to the public. So if this resolution is what's going out to the public, I have reviewed it and given you my comments. But if there is some other report, Ruth, I'm still speaking. If there is some other report that's going out to the public, then we should see that. My last question for you is, if we are going to put out a report to the public, I do not think we should have a vote on a resolution until we can consider that resolution as a body in conjunction with the report. Because you've said, we've decided that this resolution represents what we heard. And I gave comments saying, I don't think this represents what we heard. And your response is, it does. And I answered your questions and we're done. And I think that's really unfair, both to the experts who came before us and to the fact that all of us listened to them. So now I'm done.
Okay, so I do just want to respond. So what I was hoping to say is there was an effort to try to capture stuff from a variety. Everything in there isn't something I agree with. Just to be clear, there was an effort to try to put all of that in, and then the reason it went out once in June and it went out a second time and again, and now it's going out again, is to collect more ideas. I did not see in your comments, but I may have missed it, other ideas that we've heard that should be included. I absolutely want to include them, Jessica, so please let me know. I don't see them there.
I want to include everything we heard from the experts. We brought these experts to us.
Right.
We have recordings of the meetings. We have their statements. I think if we're going to ask the public, we should take those and pull out what they said, not what we say about what they said, but what they said.
Okay, well, we do have, I think that's appropriate for a research report. That's not how I would write a resolution, but I am very happy to put into the resolution, that is the statement of what we believe, ideas that were put before us that should be in there. So I'd be really happy to get them from you.
Let me ask this question then differently, Ruth, and it is a question. In the context of the social studies work, we are going to put forth a list of guiding principles to the public and ask the public for feedback on the guiding principles. That will not be a resolution of the CISAC or a resolution of the state board, because what we want feedback on is not the resolution. So a resolution is something we will vote on and adopt. We want feedback, so we want to put something out there that we are allowing to be subject to change. That's my understanding of when we solicit public feedback. I think Fraser made this point well earlier. If we ask people to tell us what they think, we want to give them a chance to tell us what they think. So is this resolution being put out for public comment, or are we putting something else out for public comment? And if so, what is that?
The resolution is to solicit public comment on a specific set of things that we've learned about and want to get input on. It also, I hope, will put forward the one thing that I believe we have a lot of consensus on, which is that there's a problem with the way in which these ratings treat high at-risk schools. So that I thought we should put down, say we've learned this and we want to do something about it, because I think we do, but then to acknowledge and lay out, here are different ways to solve that. We're not yet saying which is the right way. And in addition, here are some other concerns that were raised. Every one of us doesn't have all of these concerns. And here are some different ways that those could be addressed without saying what they are. So in effect, I would say it's, yeah, so it puts out there, it names what the questions are and the issues are that people would comment on. And then
okay, I will say this then. I do not feel like if I were a member of the public, I would know what you wanted me to comment on, given the way this resolution is framed.
So one thing that's good feedback is to make that much clearer. That's certainly possible.
I guess I have a question about, it's an interesting point Jessica makes about, choosing what pieces of advice that we got to put into the resolution. And it's just making me, this is a genuine question, thinking out loud, like when we hear testimony and then, or when we, individually as board members introduce a resolution based on our stakeholder input, don't we do that? Like, we're not putting in absolutely everything we hear, right? We're creating a cohesive document, which to some extent, I mean, it's always, to your point, I think a comment on this document, you can never fully get rid of bias, right? Entirely. Like, there's always going to be some. And so I think what we're going for, though, is something that's cohesive, which I think you're saying, Jessica, you don't feel like it is yet. So that's something that needs to be addressed. But also that we want to, in some way, at least pick a representative array of input that we got that gives a sense of, or that responds to, okay, so going back to Ruth's point about, I think we agreed that there is some bias in the current tool, right? And so what what makes sense to me is that we're choosing some of the input that we got that responds to that specifically, because that's, to me, that's my understanding of why we're doing this. So yeah, so I'll just finish. I mean, let me just finish, Jessica, and then you can go. But I guess what I need to go back now and look at it again. I feel like I've looked at this so many times. But I need to go back again and sort of look at the particular pieces of advice we got to see, do they respond directly to that? And maybe is that something that we could focus on? Those of us on the committee of really, and this was, I know that Zach made the point earlier, and we tried to address this of like the whereas is not aligning entirely with the therefores, right? And I think that one of the issues we're bumping up against is we've worked on it for so long and passed it around so many times that it kind of is a Frankenstein a little bit at this point. I have, quite frankly, lost track. So I think, I think, again, it's a really important, I don't know if, something should go out. And I think it's really important that we produce something about the work we've been doing on this. So I will just leave it at that.
So I'll use this as an example. And I agree. I think everything you've said is right, Emily, around the fact that, like, of course, we have to make some choices from what folks have said about what we would put in a resolution. And to me, the time to make those choices is when we decide what we put forth as recommendations. I'm less clear on why we're making those choices now before we share with the public. So that's one. The second is on the issue, for instance, of a school climate survey or a student survey. We heard from lots of people about climate surveys. One key piece of research that Aaron Cuny brought back, and I know he shared this with Ruth and he shared it with me, he shared it with Zachary, is that in places where the climate surveys are used, folks like the California core districts are strongly discouraging folks from using that as an accountability metric because it is problematic in that way and thus subject to gaming. So while it is an important tool and one that they encourage folks to use, it is not for an accountability system because it causes additional problems by its use. So I think we listed it in this resolution as though the recommendation was to include it in the STAR framework, when we did not get that clear message from experts. We got messages from experts about climate surveys, and we've included the notion in the resolution that a climate survey would be a good component for a STAR rating. I dispute that. Some of our experts dispute that. That's my concern with that piece of the resolution. I'll say one last thing. And that is, I think we also have to think about the fact that we talked a lot about leading versus lagging indicators. The problem is that a state accountability system, period, end of story, is a lagging indicator because tests are given in the spring, test results are gotten in August, the report card comes out in October. There's no way around that. Anything we include in the system is also going to come out in October. And if it's going to be called the 1920 school report card, we can't use data from the 2021 school year. So it's all lagging indicators. We can't use leading indicators in an accountability system that is designed with a lag. Schools use leading indicators all the time to try to figure out what to do next about their own improvement. But I don't think it's appropriate to include them in a state accountability system that is designed on a lag. So again, I think there are big issues, and I'm going to say this one last time. I think a lot of this starts with the fact that we did not ground our discussion as a board in the what are we trying to accomplish with this feedback. And I think we've landed in this sort of Frankenstein. There's a lot of stuff. There's some we agree and some we don't. And so we're not ready to put pen to paper and say, here's our statement of purpose, here's our statement of belief, because we don't have it yet. We're not there yet. We're still in the middle of it. That's my take.
So let me just respond and then others can get in. What I tried to do, and insofar as I didn't, I want to, which is, to your point, options that were put before us that there is support for should be in here listed as options. In other words, what I tried to do was say, here's a set of proposals that we have been presented with, either by research, either by researchers. We don't yet have a view on which ones we're going to use to solve these problems, but we're saying, here's the set of options. And I will just say, I obviously didn't do it perfectly. I tried to include the full range of those that I thought anybody had thought were, should be part of the discussion. I'm sure across 15 speakers, there was probably some idea that might have gotten raised that I didn't include, and neither did anybody else. But if there's something that should be included, and it's not, I do want it in there, regardless of who is for it or not for it. The point is to say these are the things we've heard. In terms of your point about the climate surveys, what I did try to do, again, I am happy to make this clearer, is to make it clear that all of these have trade-offs. That was kind of the point of that. They all have trade-offs. And I don't have I don't want to pick one out to say, well, this one has a specific trade-off, but if we want to sort of use a few examples to set up trade-offs, that's fine too. I tried to have that general idea in there. And I'll just say on the leading lagging, there are systems that try to have indicators in there that suggest whether the school is on the right track. I mean, the Chicago Consortium believes that's what it uses its survey work for. They believe
But
that.
the Chicago Consortium isn't a state accountability system.
No, but it is in the state accountability. Well, two things. First of all, they think it should be, that they think that it can be used as an indicator. And secondly, the state of Illinois does use it for a small percentage. But the other thing I would say is, part of the way I tried to word it was to sort of totally leave it open about, do we report this stuff as a report? Or do we include it as indicators? Because I know everybody's not in the same place on that. So I tried to leave that open. And I think part of what happened is in an effort to try to make it clear that a lot of things were on the table, that maybe it wasn't so clear what was exactly on the table. And, possibly that's stylistic and can be solved if we want to solve it. Because all the things that you're saying should be in there, or that if there are other things you want in there, I'm for it. That's my concern. Yeah, we're done. That's it. Others?
Yeah, I will just add my 2 cents. I will just continue to say I'm exhausted by these conversations. I will recommend one. I do think it's reasonable for us to vote on a resolution and make clear that we want the public to provide input. I think the elephant in the room for me, though, is we've invited experts, we take votes, we get the input. Where is OSCE in all of this? And what is the level of engagement there in the conversations? And what are they willing to do? And I don't think we've had sufficient conversation there. Ruth, I don't know if you have insight there. But I do think, nonetheless, it's still reasonable for us to take a vote. I do think, based on what Jessica is saying, which I think is somewhat fair, and what I think you're saying is the purpose of this resolution, Ruth, is we're not taking a stance. We're saying, here are the things we've heard from 6 or 7 experts, and now we're punting it to the public to provide further discussion and maybe further recommendations. One thing we would be weighing in on to say, though, is we all agree that there is room for improvement in our current system. Another way of saying that there is bias within our system that could be improved upon. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. If I can just offer a recommendation, I don't know if it's possible for the September public meeting. Maybe it is, but maybe the staff can draw up, to Fraser's points. I forget what he called it. I would call it a 1-pager. I think he said 1 letter or something. But a 1-pager on what we heard from each expert, or maybe less the expert, but more the idea. And that way we can attach it to the resolution and provide further context for more discussion.
So
I'll just say on that, the staff, sorry, John Paul, the staff is developing a much longer piece, sort of about the different speakers. I don't know about the 1-pager.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is we are already working on that and have been since since early August, July meeting, and we're at the final stages now of confirming what our summaries are with the individual panelists, so that we're clear on what we're saying in the memo is what they said, because we want to make sure that it's very clear in that type of thing. So you're right on, and I do want to note that that Ruth did ask for that memo way before this type of discussion. So it has been in our minds and leadership too, to make sure that is clear of what was said in the experts.
And so, John Paul, Ruth, just to make sure I'm clear, is the idea that memo would be available by our public meeting, 1, and then 2, is it the idea that it's going to be attached to this resolution, or may it just live separately?
I think it would live separately. I mean, it would be available. It would be informing our discussion. It would be informing anybody who wanted to read the backdrop of it, the context, the research. That's how I would see it.
Got it.
So just to go back to what you said, Zach, is just, I mean, I I think the first thing is to be very clear on the first point, on the bias, or however we want to say it. And then to be, and as I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking of, to be very clear about, and here are other issues that we've heard and other possible options that we are looking forward to hearing from our constituents and the public on.
And so maybe a recommendation there is taking out the language as it is now in the resolution and framing it as, whereas the state board compiled, a memo or testimony from experts, and more so referencing people there versus trying to characterize what we heard, which we probably wouldn't do justice in a few lines anyway.
I mean, I'm just gonna say, I think that's weird for a resolution to say, and we heard from so-and-so. I mean, I just think we should, hopefully we can agree on just a list of things. It shouldn't be controversial. I'm not trying to be controversial on this, to say these are the concerns we've heard, these are the options we've heard. And
Ruth, why again then do we need a resolution? We can do a call for public comments, putting out the information in a report with and advertising that, and even putting, some digital advertising on social media, asking for public comment from our constituents without doing a resolution. And then after compiling that information, we can then give the compiled information to OSSI and ask them to come back to us with a revised request for star rating. There's no reason we actually need a resolution right now or to vote on a resolution.
The reason to have a resolution is to say that the board has a strong view about this issue of bias.
But we don't, though. Obviously,
Jessica, you don't think we do? I'm sorry, I thought we did. Jessica,
we're talking right now. We don't.
Okay, but
Ruth, if the resolution were like, I literally printed it out earlier today and went through it on both pages, so if I could find it again. But if the resolution ended after like the first couple whereas clauses and ended with, therefore be it resolved, the state board is undertaking further research and seeks public comment to learn about how the system should be changed to remove that bias, boom, I'd sign it. Literally, if that's what the resolution was about, we agree that our current system has bias, and we think that there's a need to reconsider elements of the system so as to change it to reduce bias, I would sign it in a heartbeat.
Okay, well, that's
so much else in this resolution that tries to put square pegs in round holes.
Well, so the first part, okay, the first part of it was about the bias, and the second part, as I said, is about other concerns, was to reflect that other people on the board did have different concerns. That was the point. So that's why I say it's two parts. One, that we have a consensus on a problem, and then that we collectively have raised different concerns and options.
I'm getting my copy.
We don't have consensus on that second part. And I would strongly recommend we just punt it to the memo that the staff is doing, because we don't have consensus on the issues.
Yeah.
I mean, okay. When I talk to people, Zach, when I talk to you, we do have a lot of consensus, and even with Jessica, there's a lot of. So I guess I'm confused. Let's take it offline.
What I do, but in terms of the entire board, I think what we're hearing is that we don't have consensus.
Well, I mean,
so Ruth, looking at the resolution itself, I have little to no concern about the first three stanzas. So up to line 18, I am with you. I am also with you on up to line 24, except the OSSI drop in there seems like it's just a strange place to drop in, whereas OSSI has agreed.
It was in there because people, including me, wanted to acknowledge that OSSI had done it. It can go. It was there to, that's the
I'm not arguing that it doesn't go. It's just it doesn't seem to jive with the rest of the stanza. But like up to 24, I'm good. I'm even okay with 26, most of 26 to 30. 32 onward in the whereases makes a lot of qualitative statements upon which I do not think we have agreement.
So
51 to 53 feels okay. And then 55 to 67 also feels like we're making a lot of editorial decisions that we don't have agreement on. So I would absolutely sign a resolution. I would put my name with a resolution that says, we think there's bias in the system. We appreciate that OSSI has agreed to add high school growth. We think there's still things that need to be changed to address this. We're putting out this research report. We want public comment. Thank you.
So I will just say that on the lines from 40 to 51, I would like your input. In the last draft that I saw from you, there was one, I think there was just one small change, which actually I meant to make, and I see I didn't, in terms of the, instead of saying causing these high quality downrated schools, just saying these high quality downrated schools, I think was your request, and I meant to do that. So I really, based on your last response, I really did not realize that there was a huge difference there. So I will make that one change. I'll send it back to you. And we
No,
can see where we are.
It's more than one change, Ruth.
Okay, I'm saying from the last draft that you returned to me, it was
Today?
one or two. But so let's do it offline. See if we can get there. Because I think it would be very important if we could all agree that here's the ways in which we do believe there are.
I'm so sorry, Ruth. I think you've misunderstood me. I'm not saying that if you accept my changes, I will sign it. I'm saying I don't think we as a board have agreement. I do not think we've gotten to that place yet. I think that if all we were agreeing on is that there is bias in the system, you would have my agreement. We have bias in the system.
Do you agree that we can say that in more than one sentence, that we can explain it, or you just saying one sentence?
No, so I am saying that I think any resolution, I do not think we are at a point where we need a resolution because there is not very much that we agree on. If you feel that we should sign a resolution, I'm saying that I think the thing we have agreement on is that there is bias and that we agree that we should work with OSSI to address the bias in the system and that we don't know the answers on that yet. We've heard research on it. We have a research report we can share. We need public input. That's where I think we are. More concerning to me though, Ruth, is I don't know what you're looking at because the one I sent today, the entire section 40 to 51 is highlighted.
I know.
And there's a comment box that is a paragraph deep.
Right. And it's different from the comments on the last one, but let's close it out. I will send you what I had. I'll send you a note about what I did. And then we can try to work it out offline, but I think we are really out of time. I'm sorry I let this go on too long. I didn't want to cut people off and I wanted to make my responses. So with that, is there anybody that wants to get something final in, or should we can do the rest offline? We can move on to the other committee reports.
Ruth, can I just make sure I'm super clear on the vision? That this resolution is going to say we agree that there's bias that can be approved upon. We heard from experts, here's their testimony, and we recommend you all continue providing input and public discussion.
Well, not just we heard from experts. We have heard from experts and research and among us, we agreed here's a set of concerns and here's a set of options for.
So it seems like that middle part you're wedded to versus.
I'm just saying, I think if we want people to have conversations about it, they need the detail, but I need to call this off, Zach. I don't want to shut it down. Happy to talk to you. But I feel like
I just would say I think that memo I haven't seen it, but in my mind I think that memo would do more justice than whatever we would write in the resolution.
I just want to name the things in the resolution. That's really all that's necessary. So maybe there's a way to do that.
Gotcha.
All right. Teacher retention.
I don't know if you're retaining this teacher. That was an interesting discussion. I've told you what we're working on stuff. I'll have more information for you at our next meeting. We've been surveying different states and cities and things about what they're doing as far as trying to get teachers to be more involved in teacher retention. We'll have more information for you at our next meeting.
All right. Jessica, social studies.
Thank you. So the Social Studies Standards Advisory Committee met last month, and then we had our Social Studies Board Committee meet the next day. That's going to be the pattern going forward. So if any members of the public want to attend the SISAC, it'll be on the second Tuesday of the month from 5 to 7 p.m. Our next meeting is next Tuesday, September the 8th from 5 to 7 p.m. Our Social Studies Board Committee meeting is always the following Wednesday from 11:30 to 11 to 12:30. My apologies, 11 to 12:30. And all of those meetings are open to the public. The last meeting, we spent some time talking about the guiding principles that we'll prepare for the public and to get their comments. We expect to be sharing those guiding principles in the month of October for public comment. And we're working, Fraser, to your good point, on some innovative ways to get that kind of public comment, so that it is not just an internet survey. We had ideas about handing out flyers outside of grocery stores or doing tabling events at some of the outdoor events that schools are hosting in October. So we're collecting all that information and suggestions from our SISAC members. We're doing that in a Google form, and I'm very happy to send that Google form to all of the members of the board so that you can also share your input on how we should solicit public feedback. One thing Ruth knows and has brought up to me in between our Social Studies Committee meeting and tonight, we're also thinking about who is the public. So obviously we want input from community members, parents, teachers, administrators, but we'd also love to hear from groups, right? So we'd love to hear from think tanks that have thoughts on our standards. We'd love to hear from civic associations that have thoughts on our standards. We'd love to hear from local historical groups. I know the Hill Center in Ward 6 comes to mind, folks who are dealing with local history. We'd love to get their input. So as you fill out that Google form that tells us how you think we should engage the public, there's a question that also asks, who should we think about as the public? Please give us ideas on other groups you want to make sure we connect with for that feedback. And again, the feedback process will happen during the month of October, so we have a little time to assemble our process. The second thing is that in our next SISAC meeting, we're going to be hearing from a great panel of experts, some who are recommended by SISAC members, to talk to us about a couple of things. We're going to be hearing from a few academics coming to talk with us about race and equity, and also coming to talk with us about civic engagement. And we're going to be hearing from folks talking with us about knowledge and the importance of knowledge in the standards. We're also going to be hearing from an expert who's going to come speak with us about the writing of the C3 framework, which is a sort of Common Core aligned framework that is not social studies content, but is about sort of skills and dispositions. And we're excited to hear from a now academic who was a teacher who was involved in the writing process. So super excited that we have that group coming to speak to our SISAC. We would love to have a panel also speak to our board at the September 16th public meeting. We are reaching out to some experts now, but I'd love your feedback on specific folks you hope we would hear from. So if you haven't yet, I know Ruth sent some suggestions and Caitlin sent some suggestions. If you have not yet sent any suggestions and you've got some for folks you would like us to hear from at the September 16th public meeting, please send us those by the end of this week. Alex is doing some wonderful outreach for us and grabbing folks to come speak with us. And we'd love to have your input on that. So any questions? Otherwise, look forward to seeing some of you on the YouTube next week at the SISAC meeting.
I'd like to mention that the committee, the mayor's committee on changing the names of public places in the city, ties right in with the revision of social studies standards. And I hope that will be something that this is an interesting time to be a person alive in America. It
is, Dr. O'Leary. I may regret this, but we'll see. I looked at the list of places that came up in the mayor's committee's recommendation, and 8 of the 21 schools that are recommended are in Ward 6. So I have already been in contact with 2 of the schools that are on that list about the possibility of working with their students this year to have them do some research on what another school, what a good name for their school would be, if not the one they currently have, as part of their social studies work. So I hope I get to work with 1 or 2 schools. I don't know that I can work with all 8, but I am I'm very glad that's happening. And I hope that if you see schools in your ward that are on that list, you might consider reaching out to those schools as well and thinking about ways the state board can help that school facilitate that process.
I'd also like to make a recommendation that I thought about last night, in that Thompson Elementary is named for Strong John Thompson. It's on that list. I think it would be fitting that it be renamed for John Thompson Jr. That's an editorial comment.
I imagine you might have a lot of Hoyas looking to support that idea, Dr. O'Leary. Thank you.
And Jessica, I'll connect you offline, but I did want to say that over the last few days, I got to talk to a bunch of students who are local or are coming local around the activities of the March on Washington, and they were really interested in culturally responsive, anti-racist education. And so I know that both folks from Howard and from UDC, both illustrious HBCUs in the city, also want to connect and contribute to the conversation. And it sounds like you all are well on your way to mapping out those discussions. So I'll recommend it, but I'll also make sure to send along contact info as well.
Thank you, Marcus. And I know Alex from our staff sent me earlier today, I guess today on the Kojo Namdi show, they were talking about UDC's commitment to anti-racist education. So super excited to connect with students there, and going to listen to Kojo tonight with the puppies.
All right. Emily and Zach, well-rounded?
Yes, I think that I'm afraid that I'm repeating myself a lot, but just really quick, we are shifting our focus. And one of the reasons is we want to make sure that there's a value add to what we're doing, not just collecting input and using it to inform what we do, which is really important, but also hopefully creating products that stakeholders can use, right? And so actually the board will be receiving a letter about the shift, but the committee needs to review it this Friday at our meeting. So we'll do that and we'll all agree on it, and then we will send it to you. But the long and the short is just that we are shifting from, before we were doing a survey to find out how much time teachers felt they were spending on a well-rounded range of subjects. And now we're kind of looking more broadly at how teachers feel they're able to meet the needs of the whole child during distance learning. And this will involve having panels of different speakers that, might be from schools or different agencies and organizations to speak about best practices during distance learning. And that they'll be sort of focused on very specific topics related to the whole child, like SEL and parent engagement, and well-rounded education fits within that. So it's just kind of broadening the focus. But you will receive something more in-depth soon.
Okay, nothing more from any questions? All right. Nothing more from research. Admin, Marcus? No.
Yeah, the one thing I wanted to mention was just that we've had a lot of conversation, both in the collective, but also individually, just about how we adapt our online presence to both meet the current moment that we're in, but to also adapt to what I think is the board's evolving role in the community, very public facing, very dependent on the feedback of constituents and constituency groups around the city, and really our ability to be, as a democratic body, as transparent with the information that we collect and disseminate as possible. And so over the last few weeks, Ruth and I and John Paul and I and the admin committee also talked about how we really create the space that allows folks to access the information that we produce a lot easier online, but also give us the room and flexibility to expand our reach online as our roles evolve and as we work on different projects. And what we realize is that under the current real constraints of the Octo site system, which quite frankly is, operating in like 2005 at this point, there's just not much room for us to grow or to expand our reach online, at least not using our website as a hub. So we began having conversations about how we may be able to do that work, to really move off of the Octo system, to get a new site design that gives us the capability to organize our information in a more common sense way, but to also get the functionality we need to be as interactive without having to use, Assembly as a second site and a bunch of Google Docs and forms to gather a bunch of information, but how we really build that capacity in a central space. And so John Paul was able to kind of look and try to assess what we might be able to do in terms of rebuilding and revamping our website, again, both for the current moment and for the future. And I think we may have found some room if that, quite frankly, is something that the board thinks is a priority for us to do now. I think that originally we had really had conversations about how we work, at least the bulk of that work, into our next fiscal year budget, which means the one we haven't passed yet, but the one that we'll be considering coming up. But given that there may be room in 21 to do it, I think, again, given just the current posture we're in and given our real need to touch families in a different way and have them touch us in a different way, I think that if we could fit it in, it would just, I think, make a lot of sense now. So just wanted to open that conversation, let John Paul fill in any gaps, especially around the specifics on the budgetary part, and just get any feedback you all might have in terms of whether it's a priority for us right now or not.
Thanks, Marcus. And so before you were able to join the meeting, we did have some conversation related to the website during the budget piece.
You guys just let me go. You just let me go and go.
I'm not about to interrupt a board member. So I think we're probably good. And if people want to continue on with the conversations, they can reach out to me afterwards.
Thanks, everybody.
But you added more, Marcus. Or
Yeah,
I would have cut you off.
Yeah, no, and again, I apologize, everybody, for my tardiness. I'm sure everybody heard that there was a police-involved shooting that took the life of a young man in our community earlier this evening, 18 years old. And so a lot of unanswered questions over here in our community. And again, my apologies for being in and out today, but I'm monitoring what you can imagine is a quickly evolving situation out here in the community. So thanks, everybody, for your patience with me today. And also thanks for everybody who reached out with well wishes as well.
All right. Any new business? Anybody have anything to raise?
Yes, Madam President, I would actually sadly connected to that. We lost, and we've been losing several students, most recently 2 students from Dunbar High School in Ward 5. In fact, 3 of their students were involved in gun violence in one day, 2 of which sadly lost their lives, Richard Bengura and Tajon Wyatt. And I just wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank several of my colleagues who extended well wishes to the Dunbar family, as well as Representative O'Leary and Representative Sutter, who were playing touch, trying to support the family of Tajon Wyatt with burial expenses and getting them connected to necessary individuals. So thank you all for that. And I pray that you continue to keep Dunbar High School lifted as well as those families. I heard loud and clear from Principal Smith from Dunbar that when I asked, what can we do? What can I do? And she simply said, just say and elevate their names. And so my expressing this now is in part honoring that request. And connected to that, we do want to pass a resolution to recognize and honor the young people whose lives we've lost. Again, we'll talk about that more offline, but in some type of ceremonial way, we're losing too many of our young people, and we want to acknowledge that at our upcoming meeting. So thank you.
That would be a good thing to be able to vote on in September. Is that your plan? To have that resolution?
That is the plan. That is the plan.
Okay. Well, on that sad note, I'm sorry to bring us to an end on that note, but so it goes. Anything? All right. All right, folks. See you in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.
Bye.